No audio. Henrik, your audio is muted.
I was about to say you were muted. Yeah. Okay. Good evening. It was because I muted everybody when we started the video. So, welcome to the Synth stream here on Senior Synth stream here on the 2nd of March. Today it's about Softsynth, VSTs, and synths made with software, hardware synths, for example. And we have the usual guest and one special guest. Let's take the special guest first. Drew, welcome. You're muted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unmuted. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Let's hear something about yourself. Who are you? Some may know you.
Well, I've been doing professional sound design since back in 1986. And I did a lot of work from 86 through about 2001. And then I left the industry to become a corporate guy. And about 4 years ago, I came back and I've been doing additional sound design ever since. I have, I think, over 200 products that I've developed patches for, internal patches from about 30 different companies, both hardware and software. So that's sort of my background.
Good to know. Howard, everybody knows you. Welcome. And you're muted too. Yeah.
I don't think everybody knows me. I hope not. By the way, there are 3 Andrews today. It's quite unusual.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't need to say who I am again, do I? Every time.
Who are you?
Some old bloke. Been doing a lot of sound design since about 95 or something like that. Starting with Access, the virus, and then for Roland and Waldorf and Sequential later. And since about 15 years, I've been writing manuals and making silly sounds for Heckman Audio, which is Yuhi software. So today's subject is quite interesting for me, being a plug-in guy in the meantime.
Yeah. And Andrew.
There we go. I'm Andrew. Probably see me on PSN or possibly not, and otherwise know me not at all. I've been doing sound design since probably 1984 for emulators and various analog synths, and then digital synth FM and all sorts of things right through the 90s, including Novations and Akai and God knows what else. And then took a hiatus into the corporate world, a bit like Drew, working for people like Emu Systems and Creative, but still doing product design as well as sample design, etc., and sound design. And then gradually moving over into soft synths more and more for various companies. And then kind of stopped when I started getting into video in the sort of early 2000s, something like that. And just kind of somehow found myself doing it again for people and with people, but not as a paid job, because I have my paid job. I just can't not do it, and I'm always intrigued by sound design. I think it's like being a musician. It's one of those things you can't not do. You can do all sorts of other things, but you can't not do it, and that's where I am with it. And I'm got the M8X here, and I'm playing around with a lot of the Cherry Audio stuff, and of course desperately looking forward to playing with Zebra 3 when it comes out. But I've got Zebra 2, which I love, I adore. So that's me.
Yeah. David.
Okay, let me unmute. There you go. Yeah, I guess we'll call me the everyman's electronic musician. And I've been a musician my whole life, and an electronic musician for at least the last 15 years. And I'll take the opposing view today for hardware. No, I was kidding. I did start, I've spent a lot of time with hardware, but I've really been fascinated with the progression of Softsynths, VSTs, and where they're heading. I'm much more excited actually about Softsynths than I am hardware moving forward, and I think the possibilities are incredible, and the way we can link all this stuff now. So I'm real interested to hear, especially from our some of our more professional guests on some of their insights.
Okay, and Andy.
Hey, everybody.
Everybody's Andy, but
Yeah,
Synth
exactly.
Andy.
You guys
Yeah.
don't really have to say much. I'm mostly a professional lurker these days, but basically, I don't have much professional to speak of from stuff. I mean, obviously, I'm a synthesizer, sampler, drum machine, whatever nut. So I collect a lot. I play a lot. I make hardware jams and sound demos and tech demos on YouTube and stuff. I also have some science channels. That's one of the outlet that I have. But I mean, the VST thing's perfect for me because back when I was in college studying biology, I didn't have any money, and so VSTs and places to get them clandestinely were common, and so I learned a whole lot about VSTs, in permanent trial mode, let's say. I really got a love for them early on because of that. And later on, I bought tons of them. Obviously, I bought the Cherry Audio and a million other things. But it's good to talk about this because before I could afford all the hardware, I had a lot of VSTs, that the cheap ones or ones I kind of snagged here and there until I could afford to pay for them. So I'm glad to be here. And thanks for showing up, Drew. I'm glad you could make it.
No problem. Pleasure.
Can I
So welcome.
and say I prefer that we don't use the word VST. Other formats are available.
Okay.
EU and clap.
Very good point.
Yeah. Let's call it Softsynth. Yeah. Me myself, I've been a musician since the early 80s. I actually played some melodica in the 70s when I was a little child. But I've made patches all the time, not professional. The last 5 years I've been part of the European Sound Collective, where I have made a few patches for Omnisphere, for Plug-in Guru, and for ourselves. And I have made some patches for Rob Papen, and I'm working on some patches for the Iridium at the moment, which should be released at Waldorf's page when they're done. Yeah. And that's me. Then I host this show, of course. And this show is not about me. It's about the topic we pick, and I'm only here to try to keep you on the topic. So let's start. Andy, explain. Why do we use Softsynths? Muted.
In my case, well, as I said, at the time I got them because I couldn't afford the hardware. I still got them years later because I couldn't afford like a Moog System 55 or a proper or like an old PPG Wave or something like that. So there's a software version. It's awfully good. It's handy. It also goes in a laptop, which goes anywhere. And some of these really clever ones, like Wolfgang Pong was putting ones on iOS for a while, they're amazingly powerful and portable and interactive with a touch screen, with multi-touch and gestures and accelerometers and stuff. So you can't do all that in hardware synths. Some of the modern ones, I guess the accelerator is one of the examples. Radical accelerator, you can actually move the keyboard a little bit, but most things other than having a joystick or aftertouch of some flavor, or strips, ribbons, things like that, or maybe a touch screen on a vSynth, where you can really interact with it. Most of them, the software actually really gets you some other alternatives to play with it and let you buy stuff you just can't afford or don't have the room for. If you don't have room for a giant rack of stuff, you definitely have room for a laptop and a controller and headphones or whatever. And obviously everyone loves knobs, everyone loves tactile stuff, but Softsynths are amazing. I used them long before they were called VSTs and all the other stuff on the Mac with old names. Who knows what I forgot what they were nowadays, but back when they're really simple electronic instruments. So,
Yeah. Before we continue, Drew, I know you would like to talk about your new release, but we'll take it a little later. So just let us know when you want to take it, because I know you may not be able to stay all the time.
Yeah, I probably have a little over an hour.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll talk about your album in half an hour or something like that.
Sure.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Andrew. All of you.
See.
Talk.
Why? Okay. I have been predominantly into hardware most of my life, and the reason is I just like the instantaneous control of sound. Articulation is everything. I remember before soft synths or synths were really a massive thing back in the 70s, I was working for a company who'd just got computers, and I had a conversation with someone at the time when I think it was the PET came out, the Commodore PET came out, and I was talking with someone then, and I was describing at the time what I said was going to happen. As before, I'd built my own. I was just building my first synthesizer at the time, a Transcendent 2000. It was a kit form thing, and I really screwed it up, and I got someone else to finish it for me. But I remember talking to someone at the time and saying, the way this is going to work with computers, I can see the future, and it is that all the articulation that I yearn for now, before I've even started playing properly, is the articulation you can get from a violin, where the bowing up or down the strings and how deeply you dig in and how slowly and what the rosin's like and all of that stuff, all the articulation was always my goal and what I wanted. And so I spent a career essentially trying to find articulation in stuff and trying to find ways to make things work that bridge the gap between here and what's coming out the speakers as short as possible, so that the flow state happens and you can get on with it. So I've always been a hardware bod. Then I started discovering that software was doing a lot more down the road that I was beginning to really like. I got the first emulator 1, and then I got into Akai and various other things. So I liked the sample side of it, and then I liked the filtering and everything else. And then I started seeing Giga Sampler coming out, and then the ubiquitous, TB303 suite, the first, ubiquitous soft synth, which everyone had and usually pirated. But it was
propeller heads thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Propeller heads.
Propeller heads, that's right. And so I started building up a collection of software synths, a massive, massive collection, until I got to a point one day, probably about 10 years ago, where I just went, enough. I can't find anything. So I went back to hardware, and I steered away from MIDI completely. So it's just what I'm playing is what I'm doing, and if I get it wrong, I'll do it right next time, sort of thing, And what's changed that again is having now got the sort of ideal hardware set up. I think a bit like Andrew was saying, the suddenly synths, and in fact, as David was saying, suddenly synths, software synths are doing things that you simply can't do with hardware. We were looking at one in the show last night, which was Rando, that idea of taking random samples, and before that, Life and various other things that create sounds or allow you to manipulate sounds in a completely unique and different way. And that suddenly, because I can't do that with hardware, that suddenly becomes really attractive. And now also the platforms, the computers which they sit on, have also become a lot more stable. So suddenly I'm building up step by step the library I want. I'm not buying everything. I'm just buying the things that help me shorten the gap between here and the speakers. Things like Zebra are very much one of those. Some of the Rob Papin stuff is, some of the Cherry Audio stuff is. I love the fact I've now got my PS3300 back. I love it. But that's my thing. And I think a lot of people have gone through these steps, and for me it's about being able to justify the value it brings to the creative process. So I still deliberately limit what I'm doing, and I will clear out again and again until I'm happy that I've got the set I want.
I would echo what Andrew just said. I had hardware, but it was back in the 80s. Then I did all the work, through the early 90s. And actually, one of the reasons why I left the industry was I saw what was then Cubase and VSTs. And I said, as a sound designer, I was making a living doing it. Hardware companies are investing thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars building a platform, years in development, putting it into ROM, getting it right, shipping it out. And it had to be really good. With VSTs, you could have N number of thousands of patches. And I thought that the writing was on the wall, that the value of the work as a professional was going to diminish because they're not spending the same kind of money on hardware. Also, there were going to be a lot more people giving patches away, making patches for free in exchange for a piece of software. And that's pretty much what happened. So I went from hardware, I don't know, somewhere around 2004, just a MacBook, and went into software. Although I have a small Surge modular and an EMS Synthy. Those were the only two analog machines I kept, and everything was in the computer. Now I'm still, like Andrew, I have a very small setup. I use Ableton Live and about 4 or 5 other software synths. And I'm also one that I like to get really deep into an instrument. The thing that's enticing is, there's a they call it the shiny new toy, and you're constantly looking at all these different things. And it's like, well, how can you possibly become intimate with an instrument unless you spend a lot of time? And actually met Howard at NAMM, and he was showing me Zebralet 3, and he was going through it and, doing everything with the waveform editor. And it was very clear that he had an intimacy and a knowledge that, as Andrew
not yet. I'm
well,
still learning.
pretty impressive to me.
I think only Urs knows how that thing works properly.
Well, you faked it pretty good.
Yeah, I faked it quite well, yeah.
But it was clear that you were going, I want to, I've done. And, to get that kind of intimacy like you do in hardware, I turn a knob. In software, that's not always so easy because things are buried. Anyway, I don't want to drone on too long.
What hasn't been mentioned yet is that you can have as many instances as you like of software in your digital audio workstation, and that's the way composers work these days. I mean, Hans Zimmer, for instance, his keyboard chops are not good enough, and he knows it himself, to lay down each track independently, as Andrew would do. So he's reliant on having 40, 50 tracks of synthesis. So he doesn't want 40 or 50 hardware synths in his arm's length.
Just for clarity, I'm a dreadful player.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I'm an enthusiastic player.
Right, that counts for a lot. It really does.
I can take that further if you want.
Yeah. You're welcome.
So the other thing about software synths is that since the beginning, mostly mostly they have been trying to give people, all of us, the synths we couldn't afford. They've been doing emulations of existing synths, mini moogs, whatever. Polysynths, monophonic synths, FM
That's
synths.
low hanging fruit. They can
Of course it is. Of course it is. And that was the point at which I kind of, sample libraries, yeah, I get it. But even with them, there's something. But the point at which it stopped being that, and there was more effort put into doing something distinctly different, it really grabbed my attention. The good news is, as you say, Howard, you can put 1 million in. I could have as many. I've got drives full of software that I just don't use. I just don't look at. However, as I think as Drew was saying, it's a bit like being an artisan. You don't go and buy, as if doing DIY around the house, I don't go and buy lots and lots and lots and lots, all the tools. I buy one or two and I get used to them, and I get used to using them in a particular way. And that way I can craft just about anything because I've become intimate with them.
But in software, you can have lots of instances of the same synthesizer, one that you are very familiar with.
That's what I do. That's what I do a lot of the time. Yeah, that's what I do a lot of the time. And sorry, the last thing, just to round this off, I do apologize, but the other side of this is the sample library thing, people doing lots of sample libraries, and there's some brilliant ones out there, and I'm always aghast at how wonderful some of these string libraries and orchestral libraries and whatever sound. But you know what? I kind of missed and have gone back to playing with shittier sample libraries that I already own, with some terrible loops sometimes, and fixing them.
I love my Mellotron. Yeah.
Oh, I adore the Mellotron. I adore, by the way, the GeForce 4. The GeForce, it's the latest version of that is a tour de force. It's everything I ever wanted a Mellotron to be. So that it's just a perspective. I've come back to it from that point of view.
And Howard's point and your point, I mean, a tool like Zebra or Omnisphere, I mean, they are very, very deep, very powerful. And a lot of people are using the presets, which is good for people who make presets and get paid for them. But, you could spend a lifetime exploring just those two instruments, and becoming familiar with them to the point at which they become sort of the extension of your voice. Just like you would maybe, whether you're a Stratocaster player or you're a Les Paul player, you become familiar with an instrument, or a violinist, that you don't need 1 million. You do need a smattering, depending on what kind of music you do. But I could probably do everything I'd want to do in something like Omnisphere or Zebra, for a very long time and be very happy.
Also, another thing that makes it special in the software synth realm is the controllers have gotten a whole lot better, a lot more expressive. So even stuff like a Rolly Seaboard or this new Corda thingy, where you have all these layers of expression and stuff, and even portability in some cases. So it goes with the laptop, takes anywhere. And you can do stuff that only more recent keyboards are starting to do, like stuff with MPE and Poly Aftertouch, things like that. But even then, you can't. I know a lot of people don't like this thing because it feels like a dead body, kind of. But but it's incredibly expressive if you're a guitarist or used to fingerboards and stuff. You can move your hands around like you're on a
little anecdote about that. Sorry to butt it.
Yeah.
My wife told actually Roland Lamb himself while eating in some Japanese restaurant in London. She told him, well, if this doesn't work out with your new instrument, you could go into sex toy business.
Exactly, yeah. That was the joke. You put two seaboards together and there you have it. So, yeah.
Then I have to ask, when you make a patch or make a library, are you doing all the patches first without thinking about the additional controllers? Are you doing the modulation afterwards, after you've done something you're satisfied with, or are you doing it at the same time?
I'll go there.
Great question.
I do it. I actually minimalize the amount of control that I will put into a patch, because you don't know what somebody at the end user is going to have at their disposal. So mod wheel, aftertouch. A lot of people don't have aftertouch, although that's become much more prevalent. But I don't go really deep into lots of controls personally, because I want to try to make the sound as good as it can be without somebody having to have an extensive controller at, MPE or whatever. So I generally limit what I do. Although with macros now, which you see on the Cherry Audio stuff and on GeForce's stuff, that makes it a lot easier to get multiple versions of the patch just by setting up the macros. And then you know that somebody has those 4 knobs or whatever it is to utilize. So that makes it a lot more powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a time about 10 years ago where I thought I'm going to drop aftertouch because all the consumer-grade keyboards are dropping it as well. Unfortunately, it's come back with polyphonic and MPE. So yeah, I try to put aftertouch in just about everything I do, and then I am forced by the company to put 8 more dimensions of control in there because of 4 pads or 8 knobs of macros. And it teaches me a thing or two about control. It's quite interesting to try and make the most, to get new controls into an old sound that you made.
But don't you risk
that also for the Dark Zebra, because all those sounds they didn't have.
Don't you risk making the patch boring to start with, because you are adding all that in the controls afterwards?
When you start with a patch that you've already done and then add that onto it, then it's fine, no problem. But I have caught myself making the vanilla version and then letting it spread in all different directions, and then thinking, yeah, but people are going to play that one note and think, boring, next one. You're quite right there. Yeah.
Although sometimes the vanilla version in the context of a composition is just fine. You find that you have patches that are very big and do lots of things and have lots of movement, and you play a note and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
It's almost like a composition. The way
I try to shy away from those, or I do it extreme. I don't do a whole load of one note.
So they call it the one note jam, yeah.
Right. And I think the wave station was the
I
one.
tried to make also very, very simple sounds that have got character.
Yeah.
And just a few of those one note wonders just to show off.
Yeah.
I think when I was working for Emu particularly, we used to go out to, one of the best tools we had for selling the stuff was the sounds, was being able to put together sounds where, you get someone to play them and they just go, wow, that's amazing. And you knew that you'd either hear them in a track within sort of 2-3 weeks, or they buy the thing and then get it home and go, I can't use this. The sound's just too complex. Where's the simple shit? So it is really funny. I was earlier today, I was trying to simulate the ARP Pro Soloist on this bugger. And it's surprisingly difficult not to add all of the aftertouch and everything else in. I mean, there are some that you need because that's part of the original patch, but it's surprisingly difficult to get that purity of sound which just cuts through, and not then add everything to it, not put the big reverbs and all the other shit.
I always keep my vanilla versions that I can go back to and then check all the versions away.
Same. I think the difference between us, probably Drew and Howard, well, all of you probably, is these days I tend not to make patches for other people. I make them for me because I have a particular need, and I will tend to just start making the patches from scratch, and they evolve naturally, usually into groups of sounds that sort of something's triggered. And I tend to find that if I then review the last 10 or 20 patches I've done, they all somehow work together because somehow my brain's been in the right space to do that, which is really interesting. Sometimes people will come and play them and go, that's amazing. And other times people will go, no idea what you were thinking, it's rubbish. But it works for me because I know where it's going to be used, right?
Well, you're creating it from a musical need and a context that you're thinking of. When you're doing sound design for a product, you're extrapolating and you're saying, gee, how can I see this sound being used? And certainly I make a sound and I say, oh, I would use it here in this kind of piece. But if you play it differently, you know, it can sound like crap. But if you play it like if it's a melodic sound and then you start playing chords, it can sound like shit.
I'm kind of glad I no longer have to make mini Moog basses, CS80 brass, and DX7 bells anymore. You know, I'm kind of pleased about that because every single synth that came out, a piece of hardware that came out for the last 20 years had to have those, or 30 years had to have those sounds on them. And it's kind of, guys, can't you think of something new to do? Really?
Well,
I keep revisiting the mini Moog, must admit.
Yeah.
I was going to say as oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, Dave.
I was going to say as a musician, presets. There's a variety of reasons I would explore them. I mean, the obvious one would be to try to see what somebody coaxed out in the machine. Though I'll be honest, that's less interesting to me at this point because I find that most instruments have so much overlap at the end of the day. Unless there's a unique filter or design to it. The other two things that are real critical, the other one's sort of obvious, would be the inspiration, right? I'm going to use this sound as to be initial to get something going. And, I might end up with about 50% of the sound when I'm done. Usually I'm going to move it around just out of human nature. But the other thing that I do that is probably the most where I really love presets is I like them during the multi-track process where I'm really looking for space in the composition. And I'm really using these sounds while I have certain tastes. I'm really listening for how they're fitting in the space. And once one of them really comes alive, then I can analyze that preset and say, okay, here's why it's. So it's really, I don't tend to really study them too much, what somebody did, even though I have a lot of admiration for sound designers. Sometimes that's probably not going to be your strength. So you just kind of punt, it's why I'm not a guitar player. I am a drummer, but
you certainly are, and a very good one.
So yeah, go ahead.
Go on.
Andrew.
Go on. No, go. You
no,
that make a point.
I think that is the other thing. I'll just say as an aside, I always look at sound designers as kind of part of my ensemble, right? I see it as this kind of unique opportunity to almost jam with someone that I have no idea who did this, right? And I always find that really fascinating that there's someone behind that preset. And I, because there's so much energy and creativity in presets. So I just, for those of you that really dig into it, let me just say thank you for the inspiration as a musician. It really is greatly appreciated. So, yeah, that's it, Andrew. Go ahead.
I have to ask you, David, when you're talking about inspiration, do you start a song with a melody in your head, or do you browse patches and then
I would never say
tricks it?
Yeah, I would say probably pretty typical to a lot of people. I just start playing. And so there is something can be in that patch, right? The sounds, even the pulse. Sometimes though it's with a rhythm, right, first. So there's this weird interaction between melody and rhythm that has to happen. So it can be in the patch or it cannot be in the patch, right? So I don't think there's really one way.
No.
But I will use a good rhythm. I don't feel any, I know we can feel a little imposter syndrome or something if we use a preset, but.
Can I ask you a question? You and Drew, actually, because I think it might lead quite nicely onto Drew. Do you find yourself when you're working on a body or on either an album or a body of work or whatever, do you find yourself, David, essentially putting together a suite, a toolkit of sounds
Yes.
that you base things on, and then take it from there? That you can explore from there, but it gives you something to anchor everything to.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure this isn't totally surprising either. If I get any sort of new instrument, whether it's a soft synth or a hardware, it's really irrelevant. I usually kind of work with it a little bit and kind of, get a collection, and then, I do. I'm probably not as adventurous with some of my sounds just because of my kind of rock background and 80s and all. I'm not saying it's totally derivative, but I love a good organ sound. I like anything that has a little organ in it, anything that has a farfisa, anything that has a vox in it. But that being said, when Waldorf came out with Nave on the iPad, I just kind of went, wow, and got lost in that for a long time, blending those sounds. So, yeah, but I'd like to kind of, at some point, you got to kind of rein in all this creativity, or you don't know how to get going, if that makes sense.
So the same question for you, Drew, and especially as hopefully you're going to tell us about your new release. How does that, for you, how does that work? Do you have an idea of a sort of toolkit of sound, sonic toolkit that you've built up that you start with and then explore out from there?
Generally, yeah, I will. Well, as I said earlier, I tend to focus on very few instruments. So I will spend time creating different sounds that I could think of as either starter fodder for a composition, or little things that I know would be what I call like ear candy. A non-tonal sound that I know I could hear, somewhere in a composition that I like, and I may not know exactly where I'm going to use it, but I like the sound and it's inspiring. And so yes, I will build up a toolkit. And I if it's the right time, I'll talk about the albums that I have that just came out. It'll be very short. They're actually from 1993. I did them back, when my two children were really young. It's called Lost Childhood Volume 1 and 2. They're on all the streaming platforms, and they were done with just two Casio CZ1s, a Roland MC500 sequencer, and a Roland R80 reverb, direct to DAT in real time. So it's the two synthesizers, 16 voices total, through the reverb and captured on a DAT with no additional mixing or multi-tracking. And that was the deepest sound design I've ever done. I mean, I understood the CZ to a level that I've never achieved with any other instrument. It's the first one's very ambient. The second one is a little more song oriented. The second one's coming out in March, but the first one's out. And I was doing it late at night because my kids were small, and I would fall asleep when I was making the music. And because it was linear and somewhere 6 minutes into a piece, I'd supposed to be hitting one of those little sounds that I was talking about, just a tickler, ear tickler, and I'd forget and I'd fall asleep and I'd miss it and have to start back. But anyway, these albums really show what one could do with just one instrument, and I'm really happy with it. A young lady named Amika, who's in Germany, heard it, liked it, and decided to put it out. Came back to life after 30 years.
Do you have any links for the album that you could pop in the chat?
You can go to my Bandcamp page, which is drewschlesinger.bandcamp.com. But if you go on Apple Music, Amazon, Spotify, Pandora, they distributed it to all the streaming platforms. So you just look up my name and you'll see it. There's a picture of me on the cover when I was 3 years old. So it's nice. It's really rewarding to see something that you've done 30 years ago and you weren't so sure that it was good, and somebody showed interest and came back to it.
Congratulations, Drew.
Thank you. I'm going to say I'm really proud of it. I think it's the best thing I've ever done, and I don't know that I'll surpass it in its tonal exploration maturity of an instrument. I don't think I'll ever get to that level of intimacy. Is the only word I keep coming back to.
I'm dying to hear it. I love the CZ1, so that sounds great.
Yeah, it doesn't sound cheesy. So people don't really recognize that it's a digital synth. So it was done out of love of that instrument, and I was inspired by people like Morton Subotnick, who just used a Buchla 200 system, or Wendy Carlos, who just used the Moog system. So I really kind of wanted to do something and say, I'm just going to use this little setup.
Was that just phase distortion, or was it also? I'm getting mixed up maybe with the FC one. Is it just synthesis?
Just synthesis, no samplers. I've actually
a CZ 5000, I think it was.
Yeah, which was. Go ahead.
It's a better version of that, is it?
It had more polyphony. It had aftertouch. It had velocity, but that was about it. You had mod wheel, velocity, but I had to figure out how I was going to construct the two CZs with 16 notes, how I was going to chop up the MIDI channels, what's going to be polyphony ahead of time, because the total was 16 notes at any given time. So, but it's an amazing instrument. And actually, there's the Arturia version's really good of the CZ, and there's something called Virtual CZ, which is done by a guy named Ole Larkin, who did work for Ableton and others. And it reads the old CZ patches, and it sounds really, really good.
Yeah, I've got the Arturia. I'll check that out.
Yeah, I happen to like the Virtual CZ because it doesn't go too far. There's not a lot of effects. It's really pretty much like using the original hardware, and it sounds virtually identical. So that's my pitch.
I think we've been seeing a lot of people saying presets. There's nothing wrong with presets, and there isn't.
No,
Sometimes it's that someone's done something, you play with it. Generally, even with a preset, I will find something just want to make a little tweak to. But generally, you find these synths, you find the soft synths or hardware synths because of the presets you hear and someone playing them. They're not doing lots and lots of
the Omnichord thing with the Gorillas, and the Schlengteng thing from Casio.
Yeah.
We use them all.
I mean, I've even known people to take a cake mix that's out of a box and augment it with stuff, and now it's theirs and it's better. So sometimes there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh no, I think when we make sounds, they're just supposed to be a starting point, and even when I give the sounds to the company who are making the instrument and putting out a product, I say, I don't have any emotional attachment to this. You should edit it so that it fits within the context of what you want to present to the customer, because ultimately that's what matters. And I'm doing it in an extrapolated, removed manner. Howard and I think, worked on some of the same hardware synths, and actually back in those days, I didn't know making sounds.
Was it Roland?
It was the V-synth, I think. Yeah.
V-synth. Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, I love the V-synth. That's my avatar.
And these days, one thing that's nice with the VSTs is that people who make the sounds get credited, which is not something that's relatively new.
Yeah, the last few years.
Yeah.
Roland had the politics was not to credit anyone really.
No. The virus was the first thing I saw that had like initials after the patches, so you knew who the designer was.
No,
that was a clever trick. Yeah.
That may have started that trend.
I think so.
I think someone else posted that someone else posted brass 1 plus brass 2 plus then, and I think Kent came back and went, yeah, that's the CS80.
Oh,
You know,
CS80.
using the two presets. But the thing is, Kent, with the CS80, which is what we've been talking about, or I've been banging on about forever, with the CS80, you started there, and everything else was all the performance controls you had, and so every performance and everything you did was unique. You might start out with the same two presets, but everyone would get a slightly different thing from it, and that's what a lot of the soft synths have started, have been doing, and particularly recently, the way the modulation matrices have been added into soft synths and the way they perform, and your ability to then be able to play them and do some really, really different things you couldn't do with the hardware is a good thing. It's a great thing. And remind me to come back to the Zebra 3, because there's a lot of commonality between that and a lot of the video things I do in terms of keyframes and all sorts of other stuff, and that's another. Yeah, it's another brilliant thing. So,
I have a question for Howard. Howard, do you solely work on the UHE stuff, or do you do work for anyone else anymore?
Well,
if that's politically a correct question to ask.
I haven't done any hardware programming for a while, but Earth does let me do that because it doesn't infringe upon the software, his software.
But you mostly focused on what I find really, what I was enamored with when I met you was you have the ability to focus on a really powerful instrument and really learn its intricacies, and that's it's kind of a luxury, to be able to become that familiar with it and deep.
I've got a Hydrosynth and the Osmos and the what do you call it, the Waldorf thing, the one before the Iridium, Quantum, and they're all equally as deep as each other, and I've done quite a few sounds for them, but never enough to put out a sound set. So I just enjoy it, and most of my day is spent playing with synthesizers.
What is it about creating sounds from scratch that gives you the play? Why is it so pleasurable for you? Because clearly it is.
That's like asking me, why does music touch the soul? It's a tiny bit of music that just tickles my ears, as Drew was saying, ear tickle, and it gives me as much joy as, well, more joy than composing, which I found very painful. So I gave that up fairly quickly. I still write tunes and everything, but I don't put them out.
I would agree with Howard that there's when you make a sound and you go, oh my, that's really cool, and it's something you haven't heard before, or it's something unique. It's inspirational. I mean, the goal for me has always been to try and make a sound that inspires somebody to do something musical with it. Mm-hmm. But of course, the sound itself is just a thing.
We are following in the footsteps of Amati and Stradivari,
We are standing on the shoulders of giants, every one of
us.
And
Bob Morgan, of course.
Yeah. And we all have, I think, influences, right? Who influenced, who tickled my ear? It was Morton Subotnick, Brian Eno, Joe Zawinul, Tomita, of course. The people who were making really unique sounds that I hadn't heard before. And funny, for what it's worth, I've never been into sampling at all. I've just been pretty much a synthesis guy, and there are people who know samples, but for me, a sample was always somewhat static. The harmonic change over time was identical every time you hit the note, whereas although you could change it with filters and whatnot, but I've just always been a synthesist rather than a sample guy.
I did get into samples when I had an ASR 10 and Sonic sampler, and that was a lovely workflow. And I did get into making my own kind of character sounds, like the Mellotron has character. And these days they try to even it all out and make it all just perfectly vanilla, I think.
I think what you're seeing is people making lo-fi samples and sample sounds that have a lot more character, because you get the best quality saxophone, piano, guitar, whatever it is.
I don't mean lo-fi, and certainly not distortion. I mean the difference between adjacent notes. They can, on a mellotron, they can differ wildly. And, with sound libraries, orchestral libraries, they try to iron that out. I feel
right,
which is unfortunate.
Even some patches on the old Emacs could do that. You go between keys, like, whoa, that wasn't the right sample.
But that was always some of the. I mean, I used to love, and still do love, manipulating samples, because there are ways of depending on what OS you're using. I happen to use eMuse, so I have ways of getting into the sample and changing loop lengths in real time, pretty much, and then playing around with formants and all sorts of other things. There's all sorts of things you could do, but I just like the idea of capturing. It's a bit like yourself, Drew. The idea of a night sound of an insect or something that just suddenly, I've got to have that. I've got to have that. So you go and grab it and you use it. It's evocative. It's really evocative. So
there's one sound. Sorry, there's one sound in Dune. I think it's in the new one as well. And it was made by Kevin Schroeder on Zebra, and it's a percussive kind of like a rattling bamboo sound, and it repeat. You hear this now and again throughout the entire score, and it's a totally ear tickler for me. It just turns me on completely. This one sound, but all the music around it, I don't really care for that much, to be honest. But that makes it for me.
Was it all synthetic, or is it a hybrid sound?
I think it was taken by the guy called Steve Doar.
Okay.
And mixed with a few other things, but it's a piece of genius. Just this one little sound. I hope it's in the new one. Yeah, see.
And is it sample based and then manipulated?
No, it's Zebra.
It's entirely Zebra. Okay, right.
It's basically Zebra. I think Steve D mixed something else with it. He turned it into a little gem. Sorry for.
No. I think it's a really interesting point, actually, as well.
Yeah, it's like ASMR. The ear tickling thing is definitely it's a phenomenon, not to be underappreciated.
Most of us got into synthesis one way or the other because we heard a sound that just was what's that? What's that? And it just grabbed you. I've got to have that in my life. I don't know why, but I've got to have it in my life. And initially, it was the filter and the resonance, right?
That zing sound from Clockwork Orange, where Alex is getting beaten up by his mates.
Yeah.
That one.
Oh. Yeah.
To me, it was Weather Report's bass sound.
Doom, 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 doom. Yeah, Black Market.
Heavy Weather.
Yeah.
Heavy Weather. Oh, Black Market. Yeah, Black Market actually was. I happen to like Black Market and Mysterious Traveler. I mean, those two were very, especially Mysterious Traveler, where what Joe Dalrymple did with the 2600, with the 2, and he used to invert one of the keyboards.
Yeah.
Play backwards, which was incredible. For me, my favorite synth is the EMS Synthy. I don't know why, but.
I used to have 2 Synthy AKS. Yeah.
Something about this.
You sold them.
Say again?
I tragically sold them in the 80s.
I've kept mine. That's the desert island synth for me, and it was listening to Eno and Del Detmar and Hawkwind and Tim Blake and Gong And
Tim Blake is the guy who got me into synthesis. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, those guys in the early 70s, what they were doing with the VCS3 and the Synthy, it's just something about that sound just was like, that's the sound I
But
want.
that's what's interesting about things like, you know, the Zebra and or others, and, you know, for me the PS3300 as well. But the Zebra is that level of. I've never owned a Synthy. I've never owned one, and I've played with a couple, but I've never owned one. I've always wanted, a bit like the 2500, the AOP 2500, the whole idea of putting pins in and then, you know, routing stuff around, modulating and doing that stuff. What things like the Zebra and for me certainly with things like the Blue and various other synths, what they do is open up that world of exploration again. So you kind of want to dig in and, you know, what happens if I do this? Oh, wow, what's that all about?
Right.
That's kind of cool. You have to be particularly what's the word I'm looking for?
Destructive.
Obstinate. No, obstinate. You have to be obstinate. I'm going to make this work. But that's kind of, that is it. You know, you've heard something. There's something about it. You just go, what was, how, and you're trying to track it back and work out how it works. That's kind of cool, and it's really cool about the new. I haven't tried the Zebralet, but I've seen the Z3 stuff. That, you know, it reminds me of that way of synthesis again. That model of synthesis, which is nothing, blank canvas, turn on some oscillators, do some shit, see what happens when this goes in here. It's great. It's a really good way of exploring.
It's certainly plugins are easier for in the digital realm when you're working with digital synths. I can't imagine working with hardware with spline-based editing of waveform.
No. For video editing, I use a big control thing called a tangent wave, and it gives me lots of round balls that allow me to control in real time different parts of the color, luminosity, and all that kind of stuff, and have access to all these controls. I'd need that to do this for a hardware synth in real time, because it's a very tactile way of doing it. Once you can start tying the control surfaces to the synths in a way that makes sense, rather than just CC number, but actually feels tactilely like you're doing something tactile, it becomes a different experience.
It's important to set the limits of those macros.
Yeah.
If you got too much freedom of movement, it's too easy to make a nasty sound or a nasty video, I suppose, in your case.
Well, the great thing too is people are making great controllers for Softsynth. So people are like, "Oh, I want the original because I have that." But then you have to have a visual aid here. Take something amazing like this for Imposter 2, designed by Kent Spong in the chat.
Well, that, yeah.
And you have your synth, right? You have total control. It sounds amazing. This thing's heavy bugger too, but it's really well built. Perfect replica of the Oscar, basically, as far as I can tell.
I used to own an Oscar, and that thing is amazing.
Oh, they're amazing. But the software is really, really, really good.
Yeah.
And then you have that controller, and then like, okay, I kind of as close to the Oscars I ever need to get, you know. So
I mean, there's no question that having a hardware synth and being able to, as Andrew was touch and turn things without having to mouse click. I mean, Prophet 5, certain things, and even in a mini mode, there's still something brilliant about, and the simplicity of this, the design, the sound quality, it's just inspiring, you know. And sometimes I get really tired of the depth that's available, and I still stay at a very high level, and because if I can make a sound that's really good simply and quickly, and I don't have to make it complex. Sometimes you need to go complex to do things with various intermodulations, but a synth that sounds good could just be very inspiring. And Prophet 5, you know.
That's a bit like mixing indoors. I've been doing that for years, you know, But before that, I was always in big studios, big consoles, and I've missed it. And recently, I actually managed to get back into a big studio, 72 faders, and do a mix of something. And it took me, so little time to pull a really good mix together, because I had everything at my hands straight away. I could glance and see what the levels were across the whole thing. I could pick out stuff almost immediately and slam in a compressor or do a little bit of EQ and a little bit of, all of that. It was suddenly, oh, I'm home again, right? That's kind of what I'm looking for with. That's why I like hardware synthesis. Where it's good is where you have that level of, and the Mini Moog is the perfect example of that. You can look at it and see what the sound is going to be, right?
Yeah.
You can see what the sound is, and that level of tactility is just, there we go. What have you got there? Oh,
Matrix Brew. It's kind of somewhere in between software and the complexity of software and the tactile thing with the Mini Moog. So it's the closest I'm going to get to a Mini Moog, I think.
Robbie Baricelli from Pro Synth Network, he's got a Polybrew, and I've been eyeing it very, very jealously for a while, but I think I'm going to wait.
No, this one's a Matrix Brew. It's
a Matrix Brew. Yeah,
bit more complex and not as polyphonic.
Yeah, Matrix Brew is really nice.
It's monophonic, yeah.
Yeah, well,
you can kind of do a bit of what's that word that Mark Doty likes?
Paraphonic.
Yeah, paraphonic.
Paraphonic, yeah.
But I don't know if anybody has a touche, but for me, that was the minute that I kind of really said, "Wow, this is something else." I'm looking at my screen, and what I found about the touche for me, I literally wanted to turn the lights down and just sit there and try to figure out every little nuance of that expression, whether it was side right, tapping in, moving it. And I still think that thing is way underappreciated by musicians, because I don't want I think people appreciate it, but I don't see touche musicians as much as I think we should see it, because I think it's an extraordinary piece of gear. And when I played that, and I've tried a few others, I said, wow, okay, I just saw software match my synthesizer, my sub 37. In my opinion, I think it's every bit as expressive.
Hey Dave, do you still like your Continuum Mini?
I just sold it.
I
liked it. I don't think that particular. It wasn't something I wanted to explore anymore. You know what I mean? And it had I don't want to knock it. It was great.
It's very nice. It's not as cool as the big one, but the big one's crazy.
Super cool. But yeah, I mean that particular, for me, the Touche and in the iPad too, but that's a little different rabbit hole. Both of those really opened up, kind of re-engaged me with soft synths, and I was like, okay, I could just use these. I could see a world where I, if there was a world where I couldn't have and I will say space is another great reason for soft synths, just the clutter. But I could see just sitting there. In fact, I wish I had the discipline to challenge myself to say, make your next album with just the Touche and the iPad. You don't get anything else, because I think it's kind of what Drew is going back, talking about when in the early 90s when he was working, right? He had the Casio, you that's what you had, right? That's just the way it was. And
I mean, iPad you should be able to make an album on an iPad these days. It's not,
and people have it.
Yeah, it's not the tools anymore. The tool, the level of quality of the tools that are available in software has far exceeded let's just say it's about your artistic ability to use what's there. There's no excuse saying, oh, well, I don't have the tools to do this anymore, or you should be able to find something that can fulfill your musical needs. And then it's really about the composition and arrangement and sounds and, you know, learning how to use it. But an iPad, certainly I could see just having an iPad and a little keyboard and being very happy.
That's the argument, though, that it's the same argument that if you've got a piano, you should be able to write a song. You don't need a studio full of kit or a guitar. And it's a valid one if you're composing, but it takes you a certain way. And, you know, you'll get really good at that particular thing. And we know the music business has spawned lots of people who are quite good at these instruments. But what this allows, I think what's happened is the democratization of music has happened because of synthesis. And I think what's happening at the moment, and we've seen it in the chat, is people saying, well, I'm just waiting for the right MIDI controller now to come out so I can control in a particular way. And I don't think anyone's going to have exactly that.
No.
Exactly the right one, because each of us interacts differently. And, you know, I might prefer a piano style thing or a semi-weighted or a guitar or drums or whatever. Each of us has a different way of reacting and interrelating to those. The instrument itself is there. It's about the controllers. It is all about the how you can interact with the musical instrument. Again, it's about the shortest distance between here and here, so that you can get lost and get into that flow state, right?
From I want to I've done. I want to I've done it. The shortest distances. You're right. It's good design, well-designed instruments make it easier to make good music, or to find sounds that are satisfying. And Lord knows there's the differential in design across Softsynth. Some of them I go, what were they thinking? You know, it's just design. When design overtakes functionality, that's when I start getting like, I can't use this. It's too distracting. You know.
Well, one thing I can think of like that, I don't know if you ever used Tone 2's Gladiator. It's a beautiful synth, but it's almost too beautiful and too gadgety looking. And although it sounds good, you're just blown away by this beautiful interface, and it's a little hard to read some of the stuff. And that can get in the way. The skeuomorphic stuff and the more crazy graphics can really screw things up.
I mean, usability is really an important, when you have a complex instrument, the ability to get to the various things and how you have to navigate is really an incredibly important aspect. Sometimes that seems to get
I was talking to someone not so long ago. I do a bit of mentoring along the way with people, and what I often find with people that are writing is they will have a melody or something in their head or a chord sequence, and what you hear them play is the sound. But what they're hearing is that sound plus all the other stuff that goes with it. And it used to be that would take a very long time. You'd have to get in session musicians to do things. You'd have, all of that kind of stuff used to happen. Now, in fact, since orchestrally, Roland did a really good job with their orchestral plugin, their orchestral soft. It wasn't great, but there was some decent sounds in there if you explored, and it meant that you could think of something, start writing it, bang up one of those, and start putting all the different instrumentation in for an orchestral piece, and get it really close. You could actually do something in an entire day that would have once upon a time taken weeks or months to do.
I hope you're not talking about general MIDI.
No. But the point being, synths are now doing the same thing because so many people have wanted all the synths. Hardware's expensive, right? I mean, I've got so much of the stuff around. It's stupid, and at the studio even more. But doing this here with a few plugins is so much easier and less costly, and I can get there. So it's just about connecting the dots now between the controls and the software, because mouse clicking is driving me nuts, and touch screens drive me nuts as well. Using soft screens to control synths
Yeah, me
drives
too.
me nuts. Drives me nuts.
I can't use iPad to control anything.
Remember those knobs they would put on an iPad that would actually rotate?
Yes.
Yeah.
So one thing that hasn't been mentioned is, we're talking about inspiration and going down rabbit holes and all this expression of availability and weird stuff. No one's mentioned modular yet, which is not only an amazing platform in so many ways, but the soft modular stuff is going crazy now, with presets and impossible numbers of modules that you couldn't ever afford and stuff. It's a cool idea. Yeah. With presets.
So who's using soft modular at the moment? Anyone here?
I'm a little bit, but I mean, like VCV Rack is free, and you can get in for nothing with a bunch of cool modules. It's not as fun as real modular. I prefer real modular, but to have the portability again on an iPad, on a laptop, you could use MIDI controllers with if you want to. But talk about crazy patch design. Holy
Yeah,
smokes.
if only we had someone in the chat that had a shitload of modular, but I can't fit. Oh no,
Modular is for nerds,
Okay.
non-musical nerds.
That's it. Where's your propeller head? Your little cap.
I got to say, the fact that what we see with modulars these days just blows my mind. I never thought I'd see the day where people were building huge modulars. I mean, what did Dieter Doepfer create, unleash on the world? It's pretty amazing.
And thank God for him, I mean, really, it because the way that little idea that he had changed not just modular, but all the hardware synths that were coming out around the same time and afterwards. Because I don't think you would have seen the resurgence to having things like CV being just about ubiquitous on hardware synths now.
Yeah, sure.
That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for what he did, Because it's like people aren't going to come out with so Akai did that Max 49 controller keyboard that had CV on it, right? That wouldn't have happened without the resurgence of modular, because why would they release that for 20 and 30-year-old synthesizers when those things were kind of few and far between? But
And Akai Force has it. A bunch of those guys have CV gate now. It's crazy.
It's becoming ubiquitous.
Exactly.
But in the same way that with software synths have democratized synthesis to a certain extent, or to a very large extent actually, indoors, modular. What happened there before Dofo? There was big modulars that you could buy, but they were really, really high ticket price items, and they didn't come up that often. They were a pain to maintain, and you had to really commit to it, and you needed to have a serious budget, and it wasn't something you did just for fun unless you were stupid rich, and even then, right? What Dofa did, and what this whole modular thing has done, is democratized, because you can buy units for sub £100 for tens of pounds now. And you can start building up racks, and if you don't like it, swap it out, give it to someone else, do something else. The cost of entry into modular now is tiny compared to what it
unbelievable.
used to
be. The dollar to power ratio is incredible.
Realistically, even just from the foundation of Doepfer, right? If you look at Doepfer, which is the originator of Eurorack, his modules are crazy affordable. They're not super expensive modules, and they're, in my opinion, a lot of them are better than some of the more expensive ones, because what he does with the vast majority of his line is each module does something and does it well, and doesn't make you a lot of module companies today will try to make you kind of menu dive or remember a shift function, or you have to be in this mode or that mode, which is the exact thing I don't want to do in my modular. I want my modular to be module per function. I want to be able to grab a module, say I know exactly what this envelope is doing and exactly what it's going to do, and I can use it in a creative way, but it's going to do this specific thing really well. And that's what his stuff does. It's straightforward, easy to use, high quality, and super affordable.
Even Dieter's quad modules are pretty cheap, which is shocking.
So Ken, are you using soft modular synths?
I am an early proponent of soft modular stuff. So actually, I'm gonna see if I can open this up while I'm talking. If my brain will work that well, like multitasking. I don't hyper-thread well.
Can you raise your volume a little bit?
Oh, I can.
Good.
Check.
There was the
Is that any better?
modular.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
Testing,
Nord
1 2
modular was
1
the
2.
first, wasn't it? Really?
So there is. So I love Reactor, right? So before Reactor 6, in Reactor 5, a friend of mine had started developing a modular system inside of Reactor, where there was already previous modular systems inside of Reactor. But they would all kind of require you to do weird routing stuff. Like it didn't feel like modular in the form of, this sort of thing, even if it looked like it. But he developed a platform where it was really like you could patch your cables and everything. Unfortunately, what happened was I was close with Native Instruments at the time. And I presented it to them and said, hey, like you should really check out what this guy's doing. It's really great, blah, blah, blah. He had something like 500 modules done at this point. And they were like, oh, well, we're working on Reactor 6 and, we have this thing called blocks that we're doing, blah, blah, blah. Can you wait to release it so that we can make them all platform unified? So like blocks will work with this platform, which this platform visually was more 5U. And we'll make them all cross-compatible. Everything will work great, and we just both release them when Reactor 6 drops. So he recoded and did all this work to get it right for Reactor 6, and then they kind of undercut him and released Reactor 6 without mentioning anything to him about, oh yeah, now's the release date, and really screwed him over. So it was a pretty sour thing, but the platform is still available, and it works on Reactor 5, not just 6, which was like, kind of like, it was one of the big things about Reactor 6 was blocks. So it was like, oh yeah, we have this new modular thing that we can do, and modular was hot at the time. But they made it seem like you couldn't do that in Reactor 5, but you absolutely could. And so yeah, it was kind of a whole thing. So I say all that to say, like, I've been using software modular for a really long time, between that, VCV rack, and also in my physical modular, I use the ER301, which is a digital computer inside of your modular, and it's kind of like Reactor in that it's all building blocks, so you can actually have a modular inside your modular, bro.
And way before that, you had Macs on Macs.
Yeah, exactly.
Macintosh back in like 1990. So
Generator was the first one before Reactor, I think.
Say again?
Generator, Native Instruments.
Yes.
Yep.
They renamed it, rebadged it, Reactor. And when was the modular, the Nord modular, when did that come out? Because that was practically an on-screen modular system. Anyone remember?
no, it was a while
What
ago.
year was
trying
it?
to.
It was probably mid to late 90s, right?
Could be, yeah.
I want to say probably like 98, somewhere around there.
A while ago, yeah.
A long time ago.
1997.
That was the Nord modular, yeah.
Yeah.
And Generator, was that before then?
Generator was definitely before then. That was like a while before that. I almost want to say that was
yeah.
like 94.
Really?
Yeah, that was pretty early on. Maybe 96, something like that. But it was pretty early, man. Generator. Oh, let me see.
There's just a quick mention. There's a for people who use Ableton and have Macs for Live. There's something called Ocelot, which is by Christian. God, I can't remember Christian's last name. That's an incredible modular environment. Really easy to use. Everything looks the same, and you can create all these really crazy Buchla and Surge-like patches.
I'm talking Macs, there's also Osmos.
Say again?
So, speaking of Macs, there's also the Osmos environment, which is
Egan Matrix, yeah.
Egan
Generator 1.0 released in 1997. So I was
Okay.
not
There we
far
go.
off.
There we go.
Also, and way before they had VCV rack, they had this one on iOS called Jasuto. Have you seen this one?
Yes.
It sounds really good too. Listen to this. So it was more representative modular with little spheres and stuff and cables that you could stretch around and do that kind of stuff. But
It was
Wait, I
really
was
make-
wrong.
cool.
96.
you
It
can
was
make
96.
these massive things. You could zoom in and out, make these
When
massive
did the
matrices.
lemur come out? And the lemur looks like that. That looks like a lemur kind of thing, doesn't it?
It's kind of like Lemur, yeah.
Yeah.
They also had a Lemur app. Once the Lemur battle lost the pads, they went to iPads.
Gentlemen, I have to sadly leave. I thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks, Drew.
It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Been a pleasure, Drew.
Good
Nice
to see
meeting
you
you,
all.
Drew.
Seeing you, Drew.
Have a wonderful
Yeah,
weekend.
You too.
good to see you, Drew. I just posted your
Oh,
link
thank
to
you.
Bandcamp, and this is the Bandcamp page I'm showing.
Yeah.
So thank
Thank
you
you.
for being here. It was a
My
Good to
pleasure.
see you. Good to
Hope
see
to
you,
see you
Drew.
again.
Right.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Well, yeah,
What an
Jasuto's
awful-
about 2011, I think. So it's been around a long time.
What an awful man that Drew Schlesinger is, eh? Oh,
Oh, there's another
Dreadful.
iPad modular that's really great. I'm trying to remember the name of it.
Oh, I think you're talking about Caustic,
No, not Caustic.
because that's also old too. Caustic.
It's much more aesthetically pleasing. But Jasuto is really great too. Yeah.
My rack is the VC rack version for iPad, so it looks just like it. But yeah, there are tons of modular now for iOS. It's nuts.
well, I find it really kind of odd, the whole modular thing, in some respects, in that when I was working for Emu, the samplers had essentially the entire modulation matrix from the original modular synth built in. So it had huge numbers of patch chords, 36 per voice. And you could have, however many voices, I think 128 or something. And it was really powerful, but it was a pain in the ass to use. You had to really want to, to get to know it. But it was extraordinarily powerful. And I think one of my greatest regrets is when they bought out the Emu stuff as software. It was such a colossal pain in the ass to use, and it's one of those systems which I've always felt needed to be revisited at some point, because it is an extraordinary set of modules of modulation capabilities that just don't exist elsewhere,
Yeah,
or rather didn't. At
the
the
command
time.
station had the amazing patch cord stuff in the background. That was amazing. It was like modular in a
Yeah.
box, right?
What's it called, Andrew, this thing?
Well, we're talking about the samplers. So initially there was the E4 samplers,
Okay.
and then they since did it with all of the rack mount stuff and the things like this, which is the
Yes.
there's the XL7, PX7, all those. They also similarly have 36 preset patch chords and then 12 program patch chords on top, and it just gives you can do so much with them. But it's never been realized, and this gets you to them pretty quickly. That whole user interface was pretty good. But I miss that in the modular, in the Softsynth versions of those, and I'm still trying to find something that does something in the same kind of way.
By the way, that PX7 with the Protean drum module inside of it, do you know how rare that is?
Yeah, I've got all the ROMs. I've got every
Yeah.
single ROM.
I tracked down a Protean drum finally with that PX7. They're so rare.
But
there
you
you
can get the samples. Oh, look at that! That's cool.
Yeah.
So
That's
this
very cool.
is the soft modular that I was talking about on iPad. Let me see if I'm doing this in a weird way, but
I have that one somewhere. What's that one called?
This is called Audulus
Audulus, that's
3,
it. Yeah,
and the
yeah.
UI is done by the same guy, Paper Noise, who did the panels for like Mutable Instruments and quite a few others. He did some hex inverter stuff, I think, as well. But it's gorgeous,
Yeah.
and it's crazy flexible as far as what you can do with it. I will say, my major gripe with it is that converting from volt per octave to this interface, which it'll allow you to do, is not as straightforward as I would like. I would love, because you can, what I would do is I would plug this up to, I have a module in my Eurorack called an ES8, which is like an ADAT module, and it gives you 4 inputs and 8 outputs, and CV in and out, all that. So I would love it to just be like, okay, I plug it in, and just like the thing I love about Eurorack is that audio is the same as your control signal, right? So if I want to say use a drum loop as, modulating the pan, I was doing this just yesterday, where I had a drum loop sample, and that audio was modulating my pan back and forth at audio rate. In order to do that in here, like I have to like convert things around and whatnot and do that sort of thing. But this thing is really fantastic. It's a bit of a head scratcher as far as like first getting to understand it. Yeah. And if you're a math nerd, you'll take right to it. I am not a math nerd. I'm dumb as a box of rocks, but I like the sound.
Didn't like to say, by the way, Ken.
So what's that?
I didn't like to say, but
Yeah. Most people do like to say so, and they will say so emphatically about me.
Yeah. Clearly, we can see just how dense you are by that rack behind you. Clearly, you don't understand anything.
Man, listen, that's called compensating.
Have you ever heard the phrase "mad as a bottle of chips"?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the original sort of topic here was sort of, do you essentially? I use soft synths. Do people feel now that, because I have leapt from both camps and vociferously defended one or the other at different times in my life, and now I just think, it's whatever works for you. I think the biggest issue for me with soft synths, as with any synths, is use the one, don't keep buying shit. Get to know the stuff you do use, and if you're not using it, put it away, so you can focus on the stuff and get to know it, because 2 or 3 really good, or 5 or 10, really, really good plugs is everything if you know them well.
But that's also the same with hardware. I mean,
it is.
I might have a lot of hardware, but in truth, when I make music, I was telling my buddies about this the other day, like my local friends that, are guys that I've been making music with for decades, but are maybe not, like, it's not their full-time job. And they come into my studio and they're just like, oh my God, like you have all this gear in here. And I was like, we're using 3 pieces of gear today, tops. You know what I mean? Like,
but the difference also for you is with modular, because of the way you're approaching it, when you buy another module, you kind of know what you're looking for, and it's going to work in the same way as everything else. So you know how to plug it across, So that's kind of, it looks deeply impressive, but it is, it's logical. There's the
way I explain it to people when people ask about it, I'm like, okay, well, like when you first got into recording and making music, you first looked at a recording desk and you were like, oh my God, all these knobs. There's no way I'm going to memorize all this. There's so many knobs, right? And then you're like, oh, well, like you break it down and like each channel is the same knob. So like I point to my module and I say, so how like on a desk, all these knobs are basically the same across all these things. I said, it's the same as that, except every knob on it's different. Like it's the same thing, except completely worse.
Same but different, yeah.
Yeah. No, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's like I treat the modular as really kind of like one instrument, and it might be a multi-timbral, non-polyphonic multi-timbral instrument where I use like multiple monophonic voices are usually patched up. I don't like doing poly patches all that much in it. And yeah, it's like, it's kind of like people look at modular and they're like, oh, well, it's this rabbit hole, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, so is a blank 19-inch rack, right? If you have a blank 19-inch rack, as soon as you add one module, like one rack mount module into your rack, what's the next thing you're doing? Oh, well, now I got all these gaps in here. What else am I putting in here, right? And especially if you do like a recording chain, like my buddy Corey just got the SSL Fusion, and then like not 2 weeks later, he's like, oh, well, now I got the Drive Plus, and oh, now I got to get this compressor, and now I got it, and it just goes on and on and on. So it's all kind of the same thing. But with plugins,
and it's fun. It's funny with hardware. You tend to do the same thing as well, which is you'll have 2 or 3 pads, pianos, polyphonic things. Almost everything else, you're picking out individual sounds: a bass line, a top line, a figurative melodic something, or a earworm. So you're not using all the voices on all the synths and all the presets all the time. You end up using very little, unless you're mad, which I am quite mad. And I guess it's the same with soft synths as well. If you can find one that does all of those different, ticks lots of those boxes, then you're into a really good thing, and you can get to know it really, really well.
I used to be in a situation where I would like seek out soft synths constantly, and be in that same kind of mind state that I am with hardware, where I'm like, oh, like I want to get this, I want to get that. But then I kind of came to a point where I was like, man, like I just want to be really good on the soft synths that I have, like to the point where I am with my hardware, because the hardware doesn't change. You know what I mean? Like it stays this piece of, like this knob is always here kind of thing, right? But if you're flying in 30 different VST synthesizers, your controller knobs are constantly changing, and it's like the workflow becomes a little bit funky in that regard. And I found like, oh no, like if I keep to like a certain setup of soft synths, I find I work a whole lot better, and I tend to learn them better, where because a lot of VSTs are affordable in a much different way than hardware is, you tend to, both space-wise and monetarily, you tend to get a whole bunch of them, but you never learn any of them as well as you learned your hardware. You know what I mean? So if you learn a soft synth as good as you would if you were that kid who only had one synthesizer, man, you do so much more. You'll do so much better on it, you know?
And that's part of the creative process, though, which is limiting yourself is actually a creative plus, because you have to find workarounds. You have to find, when you're pushed to use just what you have to do something and it doesn't naturally do it, you find a way to do it. And that's where creative sparks happen. You get those sparks, those lightning bolts of, that's part of the process. By limiting yourself, you actually do yourself a huge favor.
So I saw I don't want to take up the whole thing. I'm talking a lot. Sorry. I just had coffee, but
you and me both.
But, well, let me just say this. I saw a comment in here by someone saying that, Xorb said hardware will last 20, 30, 50 years. Let me tell you something. Let me show you this, right? I love grabbing things on live stream because I'm that guy. But, so this right here, if I can move this damn 303.
Whilst you're doing that, Kent would disagree with you.
Kent will always disagree with me. So this right here is my 2008 MacBook Pro, right? And it will never be updated, never changed, nothing, because I did a ton of music on this, right? And then when I got my next MacBook, I moved on to that, and this stays as is. So all of my soft synths and all that good stuff that worked back then still works on this. I can load it up, and all that stuff still works. So there's no reason why this can't last, 20, 30 years, same as hardware, right? Vintage PCing, basically, Same thing.
Vintage doors, vintage computers.
Same thing.
Henrik, you've been listening to all of this. What are you making of the chat?
I've not been listening to all of it. I can't focus on many things at the same time. So sometimes I'm looking in the chat and sometimes I'm listening. So that's just how it is. But I do have some old gear too. I have some old Roland stuff from the late 80s and early 90s. I have an MKS7, which I don't dare to turn on. I don't know if it will explode. And I have a JV1080. I think it will work, but maybe it will only work for an hour. I don't know. So I don't dare to switch them on. So not everything works forever, but 25 years, yes.
Micro modular I've got. And I haven't used a PC in the last 20 odd years. And I can't program it anymore. It's a brick practically with my original sounds in it.
Yeah, it's a bit like that with. I think I was like that with the DX5. I got into it so much, and I love it. I still love the sounds coming off of it. And I programmed the shit out of that. And I look at it now, sort of with an expression of horror and fascination. But I just can't go there because guess what? The day's too short. But it's a lovely thing, and I think there comes a point where you just go, you know what? I've got FM here now, or I've got FM, so I've got that bit covered, and it is there's a lovely, you can get really analog from FM, really, really analog.
Well, it's funny too, because people are quick to judge computers or Softsynths or whatever for most, I don't know the exact percentage, but a lot of stuff these days that's a keyboard is a computer in a box, right? If not wholly, at least a lot of it is. So the computer part may die, even though the voice chips might be okay, right? So, or in something like the newer Korg stuff, using Raspberry Pis as a brain, it is a computer box. So that's
and it's not just Korg; it's a lot of companies, and I would argue that that's the future,
right? Harman Kardon was a Core 2 Duo a PC, So.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. Same with like Iridium. Like that's like people were. I was so surprised when people were like poo-pooing the fact that Korg had used the Pi.
The Iridium is just like a mobile phone. It's got an arm in it.
Yeah, it's like a Linux board, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and same with the MPC, and like these are all like the Pi and the Roxom board that's in the MPC, like all this stuff, they're all basically the same kind of idea, which is system on a board. And dude, that's the future though, because those chips, when you start selling that sort of platform to not just music nerds, right, and synthesizer guys who are an extremely small market compared to those who buy toaster ovens, right? So when you start having a platform that can be powerful that you sell to like everybody who buys a video game console or whatever, it brings the cost of processing power down so much further that's the future. Like that's where we're going to see a lot of our platforms going.
The problem with that is that the chipsets that are used for an awful lot of these instruments, the CPUs, some of them used to be based on P4s and all sorts of other things. Those chipsets are going or gone, as well as the ICs that are going. The central part, the brain of a lot of these synths, once you get beyond 5 years, 10 years, you may not be able to get that again. So if it goes, you've either got to buy a new one or get the next model.
You could say that about so many hardware synthesizer parts.
You can, but it is so much more. You can repair an analog synth.
Go repair an Alesis Andromeda once the voice chips fail. Yeah, exactly. Then talk to me.
That's a Kent question, and he would agree.
Go get the pots for the dual concentric pots on a SEM. Like there's a lot of parts that are very difficult. For the longest time, you couldn't get the Roland stuff because they had stopped doing the IR 3105 or whatever it is chip. Like there was, and the BA 66 or something like that. But like. Yeah, like parts will go out, and if you're that concerned about it, buy a few extras. Like I actually have, so I was in the process of building the Eisnen for Blackcorp, and the MCU chip for that is an ARM chip. I forget the exact number, but during COVID and everything, you couldn't get it, period. Like you couldn't get it. And this is a chip that should have cost maybe $12, and it was going for $220, right? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So when it finally came in stock, I bought 4 of them, and I was like,
I was gonna say you should buy extras, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, I bought 4 of those things.
But you've just made the argument there. you've just made the argument completely for soft synths, because guess what? My computer may die. I may move to a new platform. I may do any number of things, but the soft synths, the plugins, the presets, all of those will work on whatever process or whatever system I have. It will work as long as I've got it backed up as a set of plugins.
So long as the company's DRM doesn't absolutely screw you.
and also you can also use them within virtual machines, so it's not even doesn't mean what the hardware is anymore.
Yeah.
So you can take your soft synth from a Mac, put it on a PC. Doesn't matter. You have virtual PCs and virtual everything over there. So it's one of the things I thought was funny is I have an Open Labs Miko Timbaland thingy, and that was an old Core 2 Duo as well. And just like the Hartman Neuron, it's going to die at some point, and so you have to gut it. But there's a lively community out there, people swapping up motherboards and doing other things to make it a brand new computer in a box, fully valid this day and age. And it's like, 20 years old now, maybe more. So yeah, technically the soft synth longevity is incredibly long because these chips don't go away. So they just keep moving stuff around.
So you're not retiring anytime soon, Howard?
My stated aim was to get Zebra 3 out before I die. So I've got to
Extend
one
it.
reason
Extend
why
it.
I was pushing it down the road.
Yeah, well, I should think so too. You must be almost 42 now.
I'm turning 70 this year.
Yeah, that's nearly 42.
Congratulations. I hope you have an
Almost
awesome
42.
birthday party for that.
27th of May. You want to send me anything?
Oh, it's close to Superbooth. What a party!
It is indeed. Yeah.
That's got to be worth making a journey for, just to buy a beer for you, I think.
Yeah, I'll buy you some hard liquor. I'm going to try to make that 70 not last
You've
too
already
much
given me
longer.
that RTFM t-shirt can.
Yeah, for sure.
I proudly wear.
RTFM every day.
Read the free manual.
Yes.
Yeah, whoever's
about-
doing the Superbird, sure. Well, let's have a natter and a beer.
I will
That's the
come.
one.
Yeah.
About backup, it's actually a problem what you back up on today, because if you use a USB key,
I've got the Odyssey.
these USB things are not. Some of them only last for a few years. Some years ago, they would last forever almost, but the technology they are using now is SSDs for the big ones, and it will only last for a few years.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
because I'm in the video industry, we have to keep copies of things, and we have to keep it live just in case someone changes their mind at some point. I've got a third of a petabyte of storage, physical storage, which is mad. But we never use SSDs or NVMEs as anything other than temporary or as working media, just whilst we're using them. And if we lose that, then we've lost a day or something. That's it. That's all
I've got
we
my
do.
stuff in the cloud and on a couple of hardware.
And that's the thing. The cloud has now taken over as one of the choices, because now it's becoming affordable. It's been so expensive to do this up until relatively recently. If not to store it, then to download it if you need it. That was the real cost. But the cost is dropping all the time. So storing software or soft synths or content or tracks or whatever has suddenly become a lot more affordable.
Well, without samples, it's dirt cheap. I mean, that's tiny.
Yeah, but we got to remember things that were safe before. They may the newer versions, for example, USB keys, may not use the same technology as 10 years ago. Today it's normal to put SSD drives or memory inside a USB key. So if you buy a USB key with 512 gigabytes, you can almost be sure it's SSD technology and it will not last long. But
So
if you buy one
SSD
on 16 gigabyte, it's the old technology and it will last long. That's a problem.
I didn't realize that SSD was more fallible.
Do you know what? The biggest problem with SSDs and NVMEs, all of these, is if you buy cheap, you get cheap and they don't last as long. But regardless, they should only ever, any of these things, including USB drives, all of them should only ever be used as temporary storage. That's just how it is. You should only ever use them as temporary storage. Get a NAS or get a cloud account, or preferably get both,
Okay.
and do multiple backups and stuff. Then you don't have to worry about it. You really don't.
So here's the thing, right? You know how if you've been in the trade a long time, you've known artists who've had huge collections of gear, they travel around, they put their gear in storage, right? They forget about the gear in storage. The gear in storage ends up going up for sale because it's in a locker, and the storage company is just like, this hasn't been paid, and they just auction it off, right? So in the future, what happens?
Let me know when that happens next.
Yeah, well, New York area, man. I've seen it happen many times. I'm sure it happens out in LA plenty. But let me say this though: what happens in the future when you forget about your cloud account and they start auctioning off your information, your bits? That's what I want to see. I want to see all the storage cloud things starting to say, "Oh, well, you haven't paid your balance, and we're going to auction off your."
Does Alan Wilder have a cloud account? So remember his patches got out there.
Well, back to the subject. Softsynth. Let's see. What's inside a hydrosynth? Isn't it a Softsynth too? Actually,
Well, yes and no, depending on how you look at that. So it's not code that would run on a computer, if that's what you mean, because it's coded on a custom DSP chip that they have built in house. It's an A5 chip, and on the Deluxe there's 2 of those A5 chips running in parallel, and technically in series also, I guess, depending on how you align it. But anyway, point being is that I think some of the difference between when people say, oh, well, like any digital synth is a soft synth in a box or a soft synth with a controller, isn't really accurate because of the way the lines of code get processed, in the order of which they get processed and that sort of thing. So there is differences there. Yes, they're digital. Yes, it's possible to do things like code ports and that sort of thing, depending on how talented your engineers are and that sort of thing. And, things that are above my knowledge level as far as coding. But yeah, a digital synthesizer is not necessarily the same as a VST in a box because of how processing actually works. Andrew might be able to speak better to that than I can, but that's the loose layman's way of putting it.
To an extent, that's absolutely right. To an extent, in that for virtual synthesis, you are creating in a computer of some sort, in a processor, a model that replicates circuits, analog circuitry or not analog circuitry, but you're virtually creating the circuits and all the bits that go with it. So whilst it is perfectly, you'd be perfectly able with the ASM to do a computer version of that. Why would you? That's not your business model. You don't
Yeah, and
need to.
Very, very, very early on, like when we start coming up with ideas of what we want synthesis to be, it's built in a different platform. Like it's built, obviously, like we want to have prototyping and all that kind of stuff. So like it kind of starts, I want to say like a loose idea of it in something like Max MSP, and that's kind of like, okay, does this work? You know what I mean? And then if you find out that it works, then we make a prototype platform of that processing chip and the engine essentially, and have it controlled by something else. Now we have hydrosynth, so it's like, yeah, we can just connect right to that and it's great. But yeah, like you're absolutely right, like it's not the same. It like
there's also the whole model of digital control of analog circuitry as well, and that's something which is offering a huge set of opportunities at the moment. So with the release of the Korg PS3300. It's not the original PS3300. It's a lot of the same analog sort of circuit design, but it's all under digital control. So whilst it's a completely analog signal path, there's a lot of stuff going on under the hood that makes it so much better than it was. And I'm still thinking, God, 10,000 when it comes out. It's a good price for that thing. I love it. I absolutely love it. And by the way, I keep on sort of swerving off getting the Hydra Synth Deluxe. I keep on swerving off it, but it's only going to last so long before I actually fall at the fence.
Get it.
Yeah, I know. My wife will beat me.
Yeah, but as far as like
big enough so
digital
you can hide behind
software,
it.
digital Softsynth and all that, yeah, like to me it's all about like just being connected to the user interface, because like I don't mind using Softsynths. I use them all the time. I like Softsynths a lot, and there are certain advantages there too. Like on a hardware synth, you have to have a really, really good UI to make mod matrix stuff work well. Whereas on a Softsynth, I feel like it's much easier to get by with the kind of spreadsheeting and whatnot, or even just a lot of plugins will do a thing where it's like you click your source and then you can just raise up and down like a fader or whatever it is on the plugin to add modulation from that source, that sort of thing.
That's something that the Polybrute, the Maxi Brute has done really, really well. Its modulation matrix is astonishingly clever.
Yeah, like you have to have really good UI design in order to make hardware synths that are more complicated than something like a Prophet 5 or a Jupiter 6, where it's basically like there's not a lot to do. Like there's really not. Like, and it's hard to screw these up because it's like you've got one LFO and there's very limited routing possibilities. But when you get into something like a Softsynth where you have routing possibilities that'll just rattle your brain for ages, it's very easy to get lost in the sauce with that sort of thing and how you program it all. But on a Softsynth, it's much easier, I think, to display and get yourself in a situation where you can create all these things. Whereas if you have a poorly designed user interface on a hardware synth, it's the worst. Like I love the JDXA for how quirky it is, but man, programming the matrix in that thing is super not fun, right? Because they left out a scroll wheel for some reason, and you have to punch through and all this, and it's just a pain in the butt. Whereas, something like a Hydra Synth, it's like, oh, I can literally do it just like my modular, touch here to here, and then I can just turn a knob and I'm done, right? So whatever is, to me, it's all about like intuitive user interfaces, whether it's on software, on a screen, or whether it's on hardware, analog or digital, doesn't matter. Right there.
We've done a lot of design in Unreal, building Unreal worlds and Unreal models and God knows what else, and a lot of interactivity built into that using the new Meta 3 stuff, handsets and actions and whatever. And we've looked at this a lot, and there have been several synths that have come out, virtual synths that have come out. And they're still not quite there. And the reason is, it comes back to the tactility. Yes, you can do gestures and you can sort of play, or you could even use a real keyboard to do it. But the gesture thing is not there yet because no one's really thought through what that means. And we've been looking at whether or not you can use gestural stuff rather like a conductor to make things happen. Bring up this side of the room, bring up that.
You need haptics to really make it happen.
I agree. You need haptics to make it happen. I was just thinking, is definitely not.
I've done 3D modeling with haptics, and it's amazing. So
it is, but those gloves cost. You can pay £5, £10 for the gloves.
Exactly, yeah.
£5 to £10 for the gloves. So that needs to come down to make it more affordable. In the meantime, with soft synths, probably the biggest issue still, if you're not just looking at presets, for which we are endlessly grateful to people like Howard, and it's just getting to it and being able to use it quickly, so you're not spending all your time going, where's that button, where's that, the writing, why is it so small, why can't I see, how does this bit work, and lots of different pages all at the same time. That's kind of why I like what's going on with the new Zebra. I like it. It's a paradigm that I get from working in video. And I think the other thing which is really interesting is I think it's easy to get bewildered by soft synths because there's so much that you can do. And I think the trick is to just go through and learn the basics, which is, how do I get up an oscillator? How do I change the sound? Before you start jumping into really, really complex modulation stuff. Because once you can then explore a bit at a time and build up your knowledge bank, and you have that tool set then firmly embedded, rather than trying to jump in and do everything all at once. It's just mad.
I have the advantage of having to write the manual, so I have to actually understand what's happening.
You're writing the manual.
Yeah, I enjoy it.
I'd like to see inside your brain. No, I wouldn't. That would be a terrible thing.
You would.
Howard, I was thinking, has you ever thought of making a hardware synth?
Are you talking about Yuhi?
Yeah.
Well, they've gone into. I mean, we've gone into Eurorack a bit.
Yeah.
But as Ken said before, the first product we made was a thing called Civilization, which is incredibly powerful, but its visual feedback is color coded. So it's a bit esoteric and probably not the way we would be going in the future. So we've started doing some other Eurorack filter envelopes, a thing that turns modulation signals into triggers. So you get a jump in pitch from something, you can trigger envelopes with it, etc. But actual hardware synths, we did try to put Diva in the box once, and I think that was just one of those little cards. Raspberry Pi, I think it was in there.
I think the thing with designing hardware is that the more you do it, the better you get at it. And the first things you do are always the things that you want, and it's not necessarily what everyone else wants. And
I'd love to make get us to make a little synth. Just a little simple synthesizer.
It's all going to be about the UI design, then, though, isn't it? That's going to be the thing.
There's also technology now where porting from software to hardware is easier than ever. You have things like the Elk platform. There's some really interesting developments in the last 5 years that are. You're going to start seeing software stuff coming to hardware in a more accessible way to smaller manufacturers than I think ever before. And that's really exciting. I'm fortunate to be great friends with Corey Banks of Modbat Modular, and I've seen how he goes from development to putting stuff out in Eurorack and what all is involved there. And, really just a few years prior, I mean, you would not have seen these sorts of things. The platform that they tend to use is called Daisy, right? And that platform is very lightweight, easy to port to from like C-Sound and Max MSP, porting into a hardware platform essentially. And they even have, Electrosmith, I believe it is. They have prototype modules that you can buy that are already ready to go. So like there's a Eurorack one, there's a guitar pedal one, there's a desktop synth one, and basically like the Daisy chipset and everything, you physically can plug it in right on top and port your code to it and do all your stuff right there. And like so you're going to start seeing that sort of thing happen more commonly, and I think it's going to be really great. I, for one, would be all for a Yuhi, hardware synth that has something to the line of like Diva's style of filters and whatnot, which are fantastic. You know what I mean? Like the audio quality that Yuhi gets is just, I'd be all for that stuff. As long as the UI is good, I'm all for it.
So, talking of UIs, we've kind of skated across a couple of times the idea of keyframing and whatever for the new Zebra 3. What's your take on that? Because you're now using what is going to, I know it's still in beta. You're doing the manual for Zebralette, I'm assuming. Is that right, Howard?
Yeah. What's my take on it? It's very, very interesting how a tiny change in the angle of a, you draw a spline and then you make it a bit pointy, and that can change the sound completely, which is what you don't get when you're just either drawing a straight kind of wave form. Especially if what you're doing is actually describing the with this curve. If you're describing the overtone structure, if you're describing the what's the word? The harmonic spectrum, which is one of the modes. So it takes a bit of getting used to. It's very different.
And I'm assuming that the spline itself, splines and the points on the splines that you're using to pick these out, that's all automatable as well. So you can change the points in the spline automatically, or not automatically. You can automate them.
You can't actually automate each individual one. I mean, have I got? Is that in the picture?
Yeah. That's in picture.
I mean, I couldn't automate that. But of course, I can copy that, duplicate, select it, and change this one so that it's, kind of different. And then I can morph between those two with this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So the way you do it is just by having what is practically a wavetable and morphing along it. And you can also then change the in and out curves. You can change the way it goes from one to the next.
That's in 3D space, Howard.
That's not 3D space. It may look like it, but yeah. So
it's a representation of 3D space. It's a Z-plane. That's a Z-plane.
It's 2D. This is just showing you more from one to the next, and you can get these to pretend to be elsewhere, which works in one of the modes.
I like that it gives you those ghost lines between the two, because then if you want to make your fourth shape there, you can kind of look at that and be like, okay, well, I want to move off of this other one.
So
that's really cool.
That's nice.
There's a lot of room for experimentation, and I'm only kind of 10% there at the moment.
Well, get a move on, Howard. What's wrong with you?
Sorry?
Honestly.
My favorite thing that people say is... my favorite thing that I read from like customers and people was like, "Oh, it's digital. It can do that. Like you could just make it do that." And it's like, "Well, okay, let's see you code that. Let's see. Show me the code, sir. It's so easy."
Yeah, we get that a lot. Yeah. That's looking like a very good thing. So I know it's out in public beta at the moment. Has there been much of a response to that?
Yeah, in KVR we've got a lot of bug reports and suggestions for improvements. There's going to be a lot of changes. It's going to get better and better and better. And eventually then, when it's done, we've got the core of Zebra 3, which can probably come out next year.
I think what's really cool about this is you are doing a public beta and you are taking the feedback. I've seen on lots of other forums covering lots of other software where beta is released and it's going to fall over. There's going to be things wrong with it. People bitch and complain. It's kind of, no. This is a public beta. We want you to see.
I understand bitching and complaining. That's part of my job at UHE. I bitch and complain. I'm kind of like the grump of the company. And
You're my favourite person. You're my favourite.
And we do like hearing complaints,
Yeah.
We work with it.
So automate those points then, otherwise I'm going to come and find you.
No, sorry, no can do. But you can, of course, you can automate the morph between the two spline curves. It's practically the same.
Yeah. No, I get it. But I'm going to start a campaign now, Howard.
I'm behind on Zebra. So Spline's a new thing, or was that in a previous version?
No, this is new.
Brand new. Okay, cool. That's a great
Yeah.
idea. I always love spline-based 3D
Oh,
modeling, so spline-based
the
audio is
thing
also
is,
cool.
also the multi-segment envelope generators also it's the same spline-based editing. So we've in Zebra 2 we had like 4 or 5 different editors for LFOs and envelopes and the waveforms themselves, and it was just a bit of a mess in retrospect.
And that's what's rather lovely about this, the fact that you've thought about the user interface and you're saying this is going to be the control.
Not
this
me,
is how you're going to
first.
control. But one's going to use these controls, and once you're familiar with the control setup, the spline-based system, everything is the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a really cool idea.
So all
Really
the
cool.
LFOs and everything is all going to be spline-based, all with the same method of editing.
Are you going to be giving away cake with it?
Cake or death?
Cake or death?
The cake is a lie.
Cake. Cake. All right, cake. You can have cake. Cake or death?
I would say at this point a graphics tab would be essential for the Zebra thing. That's cool.
Well, that's what you put your cake on.
Sorry, Andy, what do you say?
Graphics tablet with a stylus to control the
Oh yeah.
Be awesome. Get a Wacom tablet. And
Yeah,
go crazy.
why not?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
But you can connect an iPad to your computer and use a pen, can't you? Apple Pen.
True. That too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you can use any graphics tablet, there's a lot of people with graphics tablets that makes perfect. Same with the Android. You've got the pens on the Androids.
Yeah, well,
historically, everyone hates drawing with a mouse. So,
to understand it, right?
Yeah.
And the host.
Yeah.
We've
Great
had
idea.
problems with the hosts because they like to grab the key, the keyboard. We want it to have
All you want it to do is to
numerical
control the slides.
entry for certain parameters, and some hosts they grab the numbers.
But that's why a graphics tablet, using that as that becomes, it's something which is well understood as an interface, being able to take a point, draw it, move it, manipulate it, and the way you've laid that out works really well. Andy, that's a great idea, mate.
Yes, it is.
I'm an old school graphics tablet guy, so that's why I would bring it up. I use it for everything. So.
Yes, very good.
And they even come with a mouse. If you use the Wacom tablets, they often have a mouse and a stylus in the box. So
I'm quite happy with mousing. I've had a couple of Anywhere, Logi Anywheres, and they do break down, but buy expensive mice.
Yeah. But I have my original graphics tablets for like 20 years. They've never broken. So
that reminds me, there's an app that I saw recently for iPad. I haven't downloaded it yet, but I intend to right now. That essentially, I like the Magic trackpads, there's an app for iPad now that makes it to where you can use the Surface as your trackpad, same as a Magic trackpad, but you can also do drawing on it and everything. But it's dedicated to it. So and it works in a way that's very similar to the Magic trackpad. So I need to check that out. My daughter just got she's getting ready to graduate high school, and she wants to be a character designer, illustrator. And she has a Huawei. No, not Huawei. I don't know. I have to get the name of it. But yeah. She's got a nice graphic tablet for drawing with that, and it's pretty brilliant, and it was surprisingly affordable. The
good thing with those is they also react to pressure.
Exactly.
And some tilt. Some even use tilt for airbrushing.
It does all that. It's really, really impressive, and it was not crazy expensive.
And it's inductive. There's no battery. The CalComp used to have battery in the stylus, which is stupid. So
see, that suddenly makes for a really interesting controller for synths, right? Being able to do tilt, pressure, draw, pull, drag, all of that.
Well, there's that famous mouse
And it's
program on the Mac.
Yep.
So sorry.
There's a famous mouse synth program on the Mac, done by one of those famous early women of synth. Yeah, that one exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could apply it to that, and it'd be pretty awesome. Yeah.
It's the Huion tablet, is what it's called. Yeah.
Oh, there are a
Huion.
bunch of them out there now. Yeah.
Yeah,
How do you
Huion.
spell
is
that,
who
Ken?
makes it. Huion.
Huion.
Yeah. and
I'm an
it's-
old school Wacom guy, but they're all pretty decent.
Yeah, they're basically like I hesitate to say knockoff, but it's all derivative of that style.
Of course, yeah.
And yeah, they for the fact that you can get them for so much cheaper these days. I mean, it's amazing that you can get that kind of stuff for really affordable. And I've seen people use them in synthesizer applications too. So
Also, the
you can do
Wacom
some
thing
really
is cool because you have the transparent, you have like a little flip up thing, and you can put like tracing paper down there. You could open a synth magazine or book and trace waves into this thing. So another use.
So the one that we got, just I'll even throw a link in the chat here. It's the Huion. We got the 2021 model because she got it a couple years ago now. Canvas 16 graphics tablet, and I'll throw it in here in case anybody's curious.
Canvas. Yeah.
Yeah, but she loves it. I mean, it works great for her, and she's very happy with it. And it was $300. I mean, come on, it's wild.
Canvas 16 Pro.
I've posted it, Ken.
Yeah, she uses that, and then she uses Procreate on her iPad Pro, and it's like, she's far more talented than I am. So that's,
Which is what we want for our kids, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I keep telling her, I'm like, listen, I am fully happy supporting you to become a starving artist.
I'm sold on that. You're gonna get me one.
My parents were like, just get a job, just get a proper job. Me, I'm like, go ahead, starve. It's fine.
In fact, I haven't used it for a little while. I've just been busy with other stuff, but I have a Wacom Mobile Studio Pro touch laptop. It's Windows 10, and it has all the Wacom features built into a tablet. It's a tablet PC basically, and it's incredible.
Yeah, she had the Surface Pro or whatever it is.
Those are okay, but yeah.
And it didn't work out. Like, and then the
Wacom.
screen had design issues with it, like where the screens were crapping out on them. And
Gen 1 and Gen 2 Surface used Wacom, and then they ditched it for a cheaper technology. So, but the problem with the Wacom tablet, it was like $3,000. So I mean, it wasn't cheap, but it is a PC, so I can load my 3D programs on there and my audio programs and other things and draw away, and you don't get the repetitive stress injury because it's a stylus. So
That's a big thing.
Very good tip, Andy. Thanks for that.
yeah, no worries.
Sorry, Ken. Thanks for that.
yeah, it's very cool stuff. And I'm not a drawer, so
Not a drawer.
I wish I had that talent. I do not. My talent is in just talking too much.
And cabling shit.
Yeah. Oh man, let me tell you, I have a cabling job on Monday that's going to be insanity. So, and talk about soft synths and hardware synths. It is a studio of pretty much every imaginable vintage and new synthesizer you could think of, and we're taking out a Slate Raven console desk, and we're installing an API 1608 II. Anniversary edition, only 10 made in the world, white API desk, and gonna completely rewire the room and everything. And it's so funny because it's like most people would be like, I don't want to be involved in that at all, and I'm like, I can't wait. It's gonna be so much fun.
I don't get on with the Raven. I've tried it, and
Well, that desk is actually going to be coming into my studio, and I'm going to see. I had a chance to mess with it at one of the red rooms at NAMM when it first was announced, and I told Stephen Slate that I did not get along with it because at the time, I think that the technology has changed since then, but at the time the screen was like a little bit deep in it from the touch layer. So if you were off to the side, which, if you're in the studio, oftentimes it's an engineer sitting in front, a producer off to the side, and then the artist here, and everybody's reaching for faders. And it's only calibrated when you're sitting directly in front of it. So guy off to the side reaches over and tries to move a fader, and it's the wrong fader, or it doesn't register, or whatever. So I am still a bit skeptical about how it will work in my workflow, but I'm open to trying it, and we'll see what happens. It'll either stay or it'll be.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to get your feedback on that, because just being able to lock you touch a fader, and then you sort of, because you turn your back, you're looking at something else, it's drifted off, and you push it up. If you can lock it and keep it so that you're still controlling the same fader, great. But that was just such a pain, and knobs, just being able to dial stuff, or I in the end it just drove me nuts, and I thought
I can't handle finger on glass, but the stylus is
it's horrible, isn't it? It's that smear. No, stop that smeariness.
You can wear tactile gloves with actually, those like using an iPad where it still registers the touch. You can use gloves that will do it. It's smooth.
I know you can't have sugar ring donuts and a Raven. You can't. No. It doesn't work.
Also, speaking of tablets, real quick, this is a really nice portable version of the Wacom tablet that has all these macro buttons on it, and even has this cool virtual trackpad thing, virtual trackball thingy.
Oh.
So these are really cool. They're super portable. Go in your bag for travel and stuff. So.
And that's got a display on it and will attach to a Mac.
This has no display. This is purely a tablet. The tablet PC is a whole other thing. It's actually a PC. This is really thin.
Yeah, the Hurian is the thing with the display. That's probably going to be the one that you're going to want to find.
If you can get a display that cheap, it's pretty amazing. But most times, $300 usually gets you a tablet. But if you get a display tablet for $300, that's amazingly cheap.
Funny thing is, I saw the Raven being used by Gary Newman in the Netflix, I think it was, documentary about him. And that's an interesting watch. And he was using it and really getting on with it. And I'm just looking, I have to say, I have looked at it again since and thought, well, maybe they've cut, maybe the UE has come on, but I still, like Howard, I've got a problem with touching glass like that. I prefer to use a stylus. So
you can get a stylus for iOS too. I mean, they make ones that work on iOS. So
yeah, but I don't use.
You get the
iOS.
pressure and everything. So so that you don't have to use a finger on an iPad if you don't want to.
Can you use a weasel on an iPad?
I can use a ferret. I used to work with ferrets at the zoo. So
ferrets and Softsynths. You heard it here, folks.
That's right.
So as far as Softsynths and inspiration, do you guys find a difference between like how you feel inspired when you're creating a sound, like in Softsynth versus hardware?
No.
Depends if it's multi-touch or not, or tactile in some other way. But yeah.
I think if you can dial through, believe it or not, the presets quickly enough, then no. When you want to then start changing the sound, it's just having a UE that allows you to make the, most changes you want to make to a preset are usually fairly simple. Resonance, filter, attack, decay, that kind of stuff. So no, not really. Except with the user interface.
One thing that I've kind of noticed, and it's definitely a completely in the mind thing. Like, it's not a real thing, I don't think. I think it's just part of like how the brain works sometimes, is I can find myself really entranced and intrigued to explore really basic sounds on an analog synthesizer, whereas on a digital synthesizer, I find myself really wanting to like dive into like extreme creation. So where I could use 2 saw waves and a filter on, and maybe some resonance on a Prophet 5 and be like, oh, like really just exploring like how the distortion characteristic is and like really subtle things. Whereas on a digital synth
anymore.
What's that?
You're limited on the hardware, so that's what you get into.
Yeah, but I mean,
but those limits,
why do I have multiple hardware synths that are analog that essentially are the same kind of structure, like 2 oscillators, a filter, like, you know what I mean? Whereas on digital, I'm like constantly like, give me more, like, let me get something crazy, like, let's change it up. that kind of thing. But on an analog synth, I'm like, oh, give me the raw basics and like let me just explore that and be super content exploring just that.
I found that with the M8X, the ANX engine. I've just with all the engines, but particularly with the ANX, my go-to patch to start with is in it. Just start from the very basic, and then switch off all of the wandering, age of synth stuff. So what you have is what you get, and then start from there. It's a good way to start. I much prefer. Now you mention it. So I said no, there's no difference. There is a huge difference actually, and I will tend to work with really basic building blocks on this to start with, and then go, well, why isn't it? And then get into the paraphernalia of modulation and God knows what else. So yeah,
surely in that case there's no difference when you start from the kind of init, then you're starting with the kind of thing you get from hardware.
But I think most people will start from whatever the preset is, whether it's hardware or otherwise.
Oh no, don't go there.
Yeah,
No,
I always
not
start
you
from
or
init.
me. I always start from init, but most people will start with the presets and then they'll start trying to reverse engineer that if they can be asked, or they'll just use the very simple controls.
I prefer to save my own init as well. Like I have certain things that I like to do all the time, and so like on Hydrosynth, for instance, I have my own init patch that I scroll to and go to those. So yeah, I also think it's funny that like digital synths, like pretty much all of them, their init patch is single saw wave. Like we've all just defaulted to single saw wave. That's your init patch. No release. Like just sustain all the way up. This is the init patch for everybody. Nobody ever made a rule about this, but all of synthesis has just decided this is what it is.
Please on the Hydrosynth change the init patch so the decay is not 0.
I was going to say, it's interesting what Kim was saying about the analog synths, the hardware, and you got an analog synth. So you're just, I want to get that meaty analog sound. So you tend to work simpler. But the interesting thing is the last couple G-Force ones, the OBX, even the Oddity 3 or the Axis, this is where I felt myself starting to switch, that I almost rather play those. And I'm getting the exact kind of analog vibe from those Softsynths, that I used to think I needed the hardware for, whether for me it was usually a Moog, because they're so good. They feel.
Yeah.
I don't think I could tell the difference, and maybe I just couldn't anyways, but that was a big paradigm shift for me, because before I separated them in my mind, this is the playground, the soft synths, and the hardware was kind of my musician. I'm going to get down to the basics and really just use my use the moment, my improv skills. But what I want to do now, and this is why I'm so fascinated with soft synths, I want to use what I'm finding from G-Force and some of those, even Yuhi. I want to use that stuff because I think I don't want all the space of all these synths. It started to really, I won't say freak me out, but I walked in and I hit a point where I was like, I can't wrap my head around what to do anymore. I don't know what to start with. So I don't know. It's been a weird shift for me where I just think the sound has gotten so exceptional. I'm still blown away when I play the OBX. I can't. It's so good, Andrew, you're
Yeah, I've been using OBX a lot, and it's really cool how true it is to that kind of sound and that vibe. But again, it's also like you're emulating this kind of really, really basic synthesizer, but doing extremely complex behind the scenes stuff in order to make it sound like the most basic analog thing. It's kind of hilarious in a way, like how much R&D has to go into like getting these things to sound just like the most basic thing that we could come up with from the 70s,
One of the things which does keep me very much vested in the hardware world is the fact that when I'm building a patch, whether it's on this or even on the Hydras or whatever, although I don't have one, send me one, is that I can, yeah, I know, shit, is that I'm playing and with all of the controllers that are beneath, the aftertouch, poly, mod, it's all here, and I'm changing everything in real time, and I'm moving between each of these things at very, very quickly to build up the sound and to get the kind of expressiveness. And I don't know what I want necessarily, but it's changing in real time, and I have access to real stuff. I find that is a much more difficult thing with. It's a much more considered thing with soft synths, just because the user interface isn't there. It's just not, it's not quite, it's not the same kind of deal. It's kind of why I'm looking forward to this Zebra, because it's going to be a lot more. I can draw and try it and see what, I'll have access to that. The only thing then is, how do I switch between screens? It is more immediate, and it is more of an engaging and interactive process building sounds on hardware. It is. It's different with soft synths, but
that happy accident aspect of being hardware connected to something and just twisting a knob. Now, granted, when you map a controller out well to your soft synth, it can get you, a good 60% of the way there, depending on how well it's all mapped. But again, that's also where I love stuff like what is it called? Brazil and Reactor and these synths where you can make all these different patch points. You get into a lot of happy accidents doing that sort of thing. And you can with the mod matrix on more traditional synths as well. But when it comes to modular stuff, doesn't matter if it's hardware modular or software modular, you start thinking up ideas and just kind of patching things. And then oh, that sounds crazy, or I didn't expect that kind of thing. That always gets me excited. That's
and that's why I like the PS3300, the Cherry Audio PS3300, because I did own one. It reminds me of that. It's not quite as fast, but just you have to be more considered almost about that. You're thinking several steps ahead about what you're going to do and how you're going to get there and what you're going to play with. And it's a different topology as well, the 3300. It's a completely different topology from other synths in that each of the three sound modules, as it were, is self-contained. But then you can do all this patching, which is just wonderful shit. It's wonderful stuff to do. And I'm enjoying that enormously. Yeah.
Oh crap! They're doing a sale right now on that Mercury 6 for $39.
Oh God, here we go.
Sorry,
Let's go to.
I'm a sucker for sales because I'm a cheapskate.
Please pause the show for 1 minute while everyone.
Get their bundle. It's much cheaper that way.
Yeah. Which, by the way, there's also a link on their page to the Anthony Marinelli, Mark Barton discussion, and it's kind of in this same vein. So it relates to this topic about analog versus digital and that sort of thing. And I actually left my thoughts as a comment on that video, but it's a great video. I love that video's discussion of analog versus digital because it doesn't get overly lost in the weeds of analog versus digital in the one's better than the other and it sounds better. There's a little bit of blurring in the conversation as far as some things are said that are later on kind of contradicted just a little bit, but that's fine.
But that's what happens, because I think whilst you're talking about these kinds of subjects, I often find myself, I often find myself making a statement which is total shite. There we go. Hello. Hello, puss. I often find myself taking one position and then on reflection, listening to what people are saying, I have absolutely no problem coming back and changing my mind about it. Going, you know what?
That's the hallmark of intelligence. I'm telling you right now. Being able to accept outside opinions and reconsider and that sort of thing, I feel like is really, that's a hallmark of intelligence, and really being able to critically consider your own positions on things, I think is really important. And a lot of the times, I feel I have a really strong stance that that can go like this a lot. So like I can't stand when people use the term warm. And like when I'm trying to discuss something specific and someone says, "Oh, it's just more warm." And I'm like, "You better define warm." And when you define it,
what do you mean
you
by
better
warm?
define it really completely, because I'm about to ask you some questions, and if you move the goalpost on me, I'm probably going to want to smack you.
Yeah.
I get very, very feverishly insane about this sort of thing, and I should not, but that's why we're nerds.
Why do you prefer 12-bit samples to 16-bit or 24-bit? Why? Tell me why. Why do you think CD? Why do you think 44.1 is
The
a good
latest
thing
and
to
greatest
use?
one is especially in the hip hop community right now. There's this whole thing about it's the converters. Talking about how they don't like how the new MPC sound, and it's because of the new converters. And I'm like,
No.
yeah, I've had to bite my lip so much, and even the main proponent of that discussion, who is a well-known producer, and like I've had a personal call with him, and even I got him to admit, he's like, "Well, I'm dumbing down the conversation," because I'm like, it's the same as referring to old hardware MPCs as analog samplers. No, it's wrong. Like, stop saying that. Like,
Analog sampler.
let me get off of this. Let me not talk about this anymore, because I can feel my blood pressure rising.
But it comes back to soft synths again. And, do we admit to that? And the answer is yes, of course we admit to it, because they have a place in any creative flow, in any industry, where there are digital alternatives. Why wouldn't you explore those as well as part of your workflow? And some of them are so extraordinary, something you cannot do with hardware. You'd be mad not to look at them. Or maybe it wouldn't suit you to, but you'd be mad not to at least look at them and consider it as part of your workflow.
Yeah, I mean,
What?
look, I was going to ask you, Ken, real quick. Is your modular connected to your DAW or your computer? Are they all connected?
In multiple ways, and I prefer the ways that make the least sense. So like
Fair.
again, I have like an ES8 module which can give me ADAT straight, 4 channels of ADAT from my modular into my DAW directly like that.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a ton of sense, right? I use that extremely rarely. More often than not, I 2-track into it. So everything, my whole studio goes into, I have a Mo2 rig that is running AVB and a couple of ADAT interfaces as well. But it gives me like basically matrix routing possibility to route all my stuff in different ways and out different ways. So even though like I would get the best signal path by going the ES8 into my DAW, I tend to just 2-track analog in and do most of the mixing from here.
Is that because it's warmer?
That's because I'm lazier.
It's because
So
it's warmer, isn't it? Define
No,
warm.
he's warmer. He put a sweater on, so
Yeah,
I
that's
always
what it
am
is.
wearing a hoodie. It'll be 90 degrees and I'll be wearing a hoodie. But no, one thing I wanted to bring up though, and it goes back to the same thing about that, is do you guys feel that the level of your audio interface directly impacts the quality of your soft synths? Meaning, if I've got a $4,000 Prophet 10 over here, and I'm just outputting sound directly analog to my monitors and all that, versus I'm playing or my Jupiter 6 and Mercury 6, right? So Jupiter 6 is going straight to my monitors in an analog path, but Mercury 6 is coming out of one of these interfaces that I have here, right? And they're not all the same ADC, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
and
it makes a difference. ADC makes a difference. And the bit rate you're running things at makes a difference. And how you're converting makes a difference. The thing is, if you're working 24-bit or above, I mean, most people get this whole bit rate thing completely arse about face. 22 bits, you're measuring molecules bouncing off each other, right? 24 bits gives you enough for recording for anything, but you want those extra bits, the 32-bit float, even 64-bit, to take account of all the other stuff you're doing in the signal, the digital signal chain, anti-aliasing, all that kind of stuff. You need that, and so you want to run it hot, primarily because the analog side of what you're kicking out at some point, that's where the issues lie. That's where the issues lie. So you need a really good interface for all of this stuff. You need really good interfaces, and people don't spend enough on them. as digital, it's fine.
I'm
I
quite
saw a
happy
great.
with the Apollo.
Sorry,
I'm quite happy with my Apollo Twin.
the Apollo's a great interface.
Which, for the record, Apollo Twin uses same DAC chips in it as a certain converter issue that I was just talking about. But yeah, no, Apollos sound great. My Motu 828 ES uses the Sabra ES, whatever the hell they are. Basically, all the converters today, even in cheap interfaces, are damn near equivalent to like $10,000 Lavery converters from 20 years ago. You know what I mean? It's insane how good even mid-range converter chips are these days, But the difference is really when it comes to the character. The difference comes to how the pre and post amp circuitry is amplified out,
It's the analog side of it, Rob.
Exactly.
I remember when we were doing the back in the around about 1999, 2000, EMU. At the time, there were some people complaining because they said that the sound of the Ultras wasn't as good as the previous generation, and the sound of some of they had an APS sound card as well. The funny thing is, whilst everyone else in the industry was using 50 cents converters, as a bill of materials, 50 cents for each converter, multiple converters, EMU was spending $11 on Bird Brown converters that were just astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. And it was really funny hearing people say, well, it's not as good. No, it's a lot better. It's a lot better. So it's really funny how these things can, kind of... Go on.
I remember listening to the Varios versus, was it Varios? Whatever it was, the cheap version of...
Precursor to the V-Synth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I found it warmer. And it's probably because it had a worse DAC in it. And the filter was then kind of set lower. And it didn't have all that scratchy stuff up top that I found that the V-Synth had. Is that possible, Ken?
Sorry, I was reading the chat. What was the question?
Okay, no, just an aside about the Varios versus the V-Synth. I found the Varios warmer.
Well, see, and that's the other thing is like you can get into, especially back then. So those are older DACs for one, but it's also that output circuitry. Gain staging I found is massive. Like you can have two of the same, like for instance, in an analog synth, you can have two of the same filter chip, but if you gain stage in and out of them differently, just a little bit, it can completely change how they sound.
I always assumed it was the filter, the brick wall or whatever they call it.
The limiter on there.
The limiter,
yeah. Yeah, and that's the other side of it as well. And so going back to like what I was saying about like older DACs versus newer DACs, right? Back in the day, Lavery was again, like $10,000 for a 2-channel DAC, right? And one of the reasons was because they had in their DACs, they had essentially soft limiting in it to where they would distort before it would actually clip, right? And like an analog circuit would. But nowadays, even in like mid-range DAC chips, that's a standard feature now in DAC chips, right?
Yeah.
Like if you read the spec sheets on these things, that's standard in all DAC chips now, or at least most, and accepted. You know what I mean? Like, so this crazy expensive technology that, I mean, let's be real, like that 10 grand for 2 channels of conversion is crazy. But that's now, you can have that in a Focusrite interface that's like yay big, And so I say all that to just basically say, like, nowadays it's like, yeah, different digital stuff will sound different, even if it's the same underlying code, but it all comes down to, like, what's the output circuitry? How's it gain stage? What's the op amps that are in there? All these little...
A question for
But
you,
when you say DAC, are you talking about an amplifier
Digital.
after the DAC too? Because to me a DAC is only an array of resistors. and perhaps some capacitors to avoid the differences between the bits.
Sorry, I'm muted here. So usually these are in an IC, and you know, if you get back to even, I had a great conversation with Dave Rossum, and I put it on my channel. So if you really want to nerd out, and it goes way above my head, I'll be the first person to tell you that. But he is a true legend of legendary status, and Dave Rossum is, like, when they say never meet your heroes, he goes against that grain. He is
He's a really normal guy too.
he's absurdly generous. And I had just emailed him, and I was asking him about the Emacs, and I didn't understand how companding was working with the Emacs, because the SP1200 doesn't have companding, the Emacs does. And I started researching it because, I'll be honest, I'm not a developer, right? So I didn't fully understand what companding was. So I went on a research tour to figure out, okay, well, what is companding and how does it affect our sound and all? Like, I wanted to know. So I started looking into it, and all the Wikipedia pages and everything didn't explain it in a way that actually made sense for what we all do, right? So I shot him an email, and I said, listen, I'm looking into this, and I don't think that what Wikipedia and these other websites are talking about companding is what you really did with the Emacs. And am I right or am I wrong? Like, am I misunderstanding something? I would love to talk to you about this. And he emailed me back and was like, you know, I'm busy this week. I'll hit you back in like 2 weeks and we can talk. And I was like, I wasn't even expecting an email back. So sure enough, 2 weeks later, he emailed me. I didn't press him. And he was like, hey, when do you want to have that call? Blah, blah, blah. I said, do you mind if I record it for future sake? Did a 2-hour live stream recording of talking about how companding works in an Emacs, and he laid it all out there. And yeah, Wikipedia has it completely incorrect as far as how he did it, but keep in mind, this is the guy who designed the DAC chips in his products, like, ground up. Like, this stuff didn't exist before him, and he created this stuff. This is also the same guy who made key scanning work in a Prophet, right? So, and the SSM chips, you know? So essentially, he goes through and explains the differences and how his DAC chips would accentuate certain frequencies and get rid of other frequencies because they were limited on how many bits of precision they even had, right? So he had to pick and choose the best frequencies to represent to the human listener, as opposed to just sending out a perfect, you know, or a try to be perfect white noise, because that's not useful to human ears when you're limited on bit space. So yeah, but these DAC converters are, and I'll show you a.
He designed the first keyboard scanner. Is that what he said before?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He made it possible for the Prophet 5 to exist.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Like, Dave Smith is a genius on his own level, but Prophet 5 would have never happened, and honestly, the Oberheim stuff would have never happened had it not been for Dave Rossum. Like, it was Dave Rossum's chips, it was Dave Rossum's engineering talent, that he was the shoulders that those geniuses were standing on, you know?
And then they went and developed their own systems because they were paying him a lot of license.
Plus, he made that amazing
Exactly.
Oddity modular synth. So,
Oh yeah.
And he had his own modular, you know. He had the original EMU modular, which is really awesome. And now he has Rossum modular, and also he's I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he is the head analog, and maybe not even just analog engineer, but might just be the overall head hardware engineer for UAD. So yeah, like, this guy has not been resting on his laurels. I mean, Dave Rossum is the king.
Whilst we're talking about this, and you know, companding and whatever, Dave is an absolute genius. He really is, and he just does it because he can't not, right? He's got a brain that just does this stuff. Getting back to Softsynths, which is, I know, a bit of a loop. What sample rate are you running your doors at, and what sample rate, you know, therefore, are you running your plugins at? Are you sticking at 44, 48? 96, 88, 192, where are you with this and why? I'm just interested.
I want to hear from Howard on that.
Sorry, what was the question? I was just looking at the
question, Howard, is when you're using your DAW and plugins, what sample rate are you running at? 41, 44.1, 48, 96, 192, 88? What are you running at?
I'm running at 48, but the company, they do everything from 44.1 up to 96, I think. They don't go above that. Or maybe they do. Because it has to be tested at all sample rates.
Yeah. But you prefer, or your default
I'm quite
is
happy
48.
with 48, yeah.
48 is my preferred working place as well. In general, unless I'm doing something that has to be deliverable at multiple sample rates. But that's more what I'm sampling at versus like worrying too much about what I'm recording at, or performing at. So like my Softsynths, yeah. But also keep in mind, even if you're running at 48 or whatever, right? Which I choose 48 now because in truth, there's no point to 44.1 anymore. Like, and I think that needs to be like continually put out into the universe, that CDs don't exist anymore and that we don't need to worry about 44.1. 48 is what more MCU chips run at natively, and like 48 is just where we need. It's more efficient on your processors. It's just where we should probably be.
However, Emax 2 sampled at 39 kilohertz and it was just fine.
Is Emax. I have my Emax 1 right here. I love it.
It didn't go to 44 even, and it was glorious. Yeah.
I run at 22 kilohertz, so it sounds like shit anyway. So.
Well, you're hearing. How old are you now? Because can your hearing even hear that high? Like, I mean, because that's your Nyquist is going to be what 11K.
11K.
So
11K.
Yeah, and honestly, my hearing, I top out 16 on an amazing day, 14 on an average day, and 14 is still like I can barely hear that.
I'm down to 8, and I've only lost an octave and a bit.
Yeah. So record at 10K. You're fine.
And the Prophet 5 Rev 3 sounds better now.
Yeah. Everything, and that's the thing, is everything sounds warmer to us old heads on our old analog synths because we can't hear the brittleness of them.
And it's far more important, I think, to have a higher bit rate. 24 or minimum for everything. 24. Andy, what are you running at?
Me?
Yeah.
For like a DAW, I don't really use DAWs that much, to be honest. I mean, I do use Ableton and stuff, but I mostly use the built-in stuff in the computer. I have a little Behringer cheapy thing for outputting, but I'm not the average DAW in a box kind of guy. So.
But are you running at 44.1 or 48, or are you just using the system settings?
Yeah, just system settings for now. But I'm mostly DAW-less and stuff with loopers outboard and using VSTs here and there. So,
David.
Oh yeah, 48 almost all the time. Yeah, some of that is just the restrictions, like on the live track, but I'm totally
24-bit.
I never use 44.
The other side of that I was going to say is just that we like, you can't forget the fact that there's oversampling. So even if you're running at 48, you can oversample like 4x, 8x times, and technically it's running way higher than that. It's just what we're outputting, So yeah, usually if I can, I'm trying to oversample as much as possible. I
mean, most of my gear's running at 44 or lower anyway, so because I have a lot of older stuff. So I understand 48 is great because my DAT is 48. That was a DAT standard, right? But a lot of my stuff isn't, so I don't really feel the need to go 48. But I guess I could. So
the other thing is that video is all 48, so it's like if you're not playing back to a CD player, like there's really no, and most things will convert anyway now, like automatically between.
I mean, the reason 44.1 was adopted was it was the lowest. It was the lowest possible common denominator, and they put a brick wall filter in, which just cut in so early, and it took all the top end, all the life out of things. Whereas with 48K, it was a professional standard, so the limiter, the frequency limiter, it cut in, the filter cut in much later, was much more sympathetic, and so you got a huge amount more sparkle from 48K back in the day, and the trick was at the time, going back possibly 20 years, 25 years, people would say, well, you know, we record at 48, but you're going to lose all that when you convert it down to 44.1. No, you don't. You don't. You simply don't. And now that was a process which was quite maths intensive and took up a lot of processing power on PCs and whatever's back then. Now it's done instantaneously. It's done instantaneously, but I still recommend going 48 or 96. Anything above
I
that,
used to
you
use
can't hear above
44.
66.
I used to use 44, and that was at the time when everything had to be MP3 afterwards. If I resampled the MP3 file or sampled the MP3 file in 48 instead of 44, it wouldn't play on all players. So I had to do it in 44, and therefore my DAW was in 44. Of course, it made wave files, wow, wow files. But when converting to MP3, it had to be 44. So for a long time that was my standard. But then I began to do some soundtracks for TV, for video. So I changed to 48, and now it's 48 as a standard in my DAW.
16-bit or 24-bit, 32-bit?
24,
flow?
always 24.
Always
I also
24.
did that before.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Do you guys use any monitoring, like graphical monitoring, on your stuff? Because we're all older now. I learned my lesson a long time ago. I always keep an analyzer on.
Yeah, me too.
Analyzers on everything, including video signals. I do all my color grading with signals, with monitors. Always.
I should probably watch a tutorial on how to do that.
Scopes is the way to go. I can listen. 5 minutes. I'll show you how it's done, Ken.
I would
Seriously.
love to have that conversation because I am video illiterate.
Whenever you want to have that conversation, it's just about having. Yeah, if you got to.
We can do a show on that. I would like to learn it too.
Even my camera app on the iPhone has scopes in it. It's amazing.
Yeah, but it's understanding how to use them, and I use Premiere, and it's just. But any of them will. If
I've used audio scopes in stores like that. That's the true nerdiness of us all. Like, I was walking through a Staples the other day, and like my son was like, "Something is not right in here," and I pulled out my phone and. I was like, oh man, there's a peak at 18K, and I went to the register, and I was like, the young girl was there. I was like, do you hear like a high pitched noise? She was like, yeah, it's really annoying. I was like, I couldn't hear it at all, but there it was.
A lot of places use those high frequencies to drive away youngsters.
It's like the kids, they actually text with those too in class, and the teacher can't hear it. So their beepers are high. So
anyway,
well, we have to end the show. It's been a long show, but a good show. So I'm really happy you all were on today. And I would like to show a picture of the next show, and that's this one. It's in 3 weeks from now, the 23rd of March. Same time, 8 o'clock UK time, and you are all welcome. This we have talked about synth effects before, but this show will be about the synth effects in synthesizers, the synth engines in synthesizers. So
you're talking about effects units, reverbs, delays,
or like built into the synth.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Oh boy!
I
hope you would like to be on that show. It could be interesting, I think. So
I'll come back to you.
So
on that,
that's
Henrik.
in 3 weeks from now. What?
Yeah.
3 weeks.
I'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's end the show for today, and thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you,
It's been a
Henrik.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Henrik.
Take
Good
care.
to see you, Andy, David, Ken, Yeah. And Howard, you 42-year-old genius, you.
42.
Yeah.
And Drew.
Take it,
Howard's cat
take
was
it, mate. Take it.
Drew. Yeah.
If you look at my presets, the number 42 is on quite a few of those parameters.
It is the answer.
It is the answer.
Indeed.
If you want to chat after the show, just hang on after the trailer here, or the end trailer.
I'll be gone.
I'll probably be doing a live stream later on because I've been just toying around with setting up. I'm trying to figure out ways I can do a live stream of my modular. So I'll probably do something at some point.
Midnight here. I'm not staying on there.
I'm just saying it because everybody jumps off. It's only Andy and me who's left after the show.
Yeah.
And we usually talk for 5 minutes or so. So you're welcome to stay.
Howard, I'm going to hit you up some point about Zebra again. Don't worry, we'll have another
no
chat.
problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cheers, mate. Take care. Good to see you. Good to meet
Bye.
you. Cheers. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
There we go.
Oh, it was the intro, so here's the outro.